Chapter 834. The departing veteran didn't know that Luo Nan was still feeling a bit awkward inside the room. He had been floating outside for over 10 days since he left Xia City. Not many days had passed, but he had experienced many things. He felt as if a lifetime had passed when he suddenly received He Yuan's call. The reason why he felt this way was because He Yuan hadn't taken the initiative to contact him during this time. Actually, Luo Nan's personal wristband, hexier, and other electronic communication devices were all placed in the underground laboratory of gear on the North Bank. He could only sense and remotely control them through the external neuron and the soul cloak. In this way, even if he were to call someone, his location could only be set at Xia City. Of course, ever since he rode the Devil Ray to fly, this little trick was revealed. The general meaning was, I'm not in Xia City, yes, but I won't say where I am. He Yuan didn't contact him under these circumstances. This reflected her respect for Luo Nan's actions and choices. Naturally, she had her reasons for contacting him again. He Yuan's voice was calm. She didn't have any complaints, nor did she make any gestures of concern. It was as if they met every day and were having a daily conversation. Bai Xinyan left Ban City half an hour ago. She called me on the flight. Luo Nan grinned as he accepted He Yuan's calm and collected good intentions. He also acted calm, she's already left. The conversation was simple, but there were many unspoken words. Bai Xinyan knew that Luo Nan was in Ban City, and she informed He Yuan. Perhaps she wanted to give Luo Nan another warning through He Yuan. But from Luo Nan's perspective, there was no point in hiding things at this point. He naturally treated He Yuan as someone in the know. That woman really does have a talent for snitching. Did she also leak information to the Amaterasu Order? As far as I know, not yet. Really? This person's position is quite mysterious. He Yuan explained softly. Even though Bai Xinyan holds a position in Quantum Corporation, her role is similar to that of a shareholder representative. Compared to Quantum Corporation, she is quite detached. But many times, her words and actions aren't the embodiment of her own will. Then, kindness or malice. Which is her will? Luo Nan chuckled twice. Who's the shareholder behind her? Wang Yu. Deep Blue Laboratory. Apocalypse Laboratory. Or could it be Li Wei, the demon from beyond? Luo Nan didn't say the last sentence, but his opinion of Bai Xinyan hadn't lessened in the slightest. Someone who doesn't have a fixed standpoint, or someone who can't see through a standpoint, can only be more dangerous. Plus, she's always playing with this sort of thing. It's mostly due to her own vile interests. Humph. Sooner or later, she'll get out of it. He Yuan didn't need to clear Bai Xinyan's name. She just listened quietly. Luo Nan spoke to his heart's content, but a thought suddenly leaped into his mind. Sister Yuan, which side do you represent? Of course, he didn't ask this question, but truthfully speaking, He Yuan did indeed have a complicated background and was deeply connected to various interests. It just so happened that she was always able to maintain a relatively impartial position. Moreover, she maintained a tendency that made Luo Nan feel very at ease. This was enough. Luo Nan didn't want to be paranoid, so he quickly cut off this meaningless train of thought. He made a request out of habit. Sister Yuan, I want information on the Deep Blue world. Try to be as detailed as possible, such as the Deep Blue Laboratory and the Apocalypse Laboratory. The deeper you go, the better. If it's not easy to obtain, basic information on geography, minerals, and labor would also be fine. Also, the person in charge of the Apocalypse Laboratory is called Li Wei, right? Do you have any detailed information on him? Luo Nan couldn't help but single out Li Wei. He had gathered this information, but he was limited by the Blood Flame Order's channels. The information was superficial, and he wasn't too satisfied with it. He Yuan was silent for a moment before responding. there are some confidential information that I'm not suited to provide. However, I will transmit some basic information and the corresponding catalog of information. If there's anything that you're particularly interested in, Mr. Luo, you can make an application to the government. This is because right now a portion of the information is gradually being declassified. And your relevant privileges have been rising rapidly recently. Under normal circumstances, the Star Alliance Committee won't refuse you. Luo Nan was shocked. There's such a move. Because we have to go through the process, the speed will be a bit slower. The other side will certainly get the information if we look over here. That doesn't matter. In any case, the entire world knows that we're not on good terms. Luo Nan admired He Yuan's ability to handle matters well without stepping out of the circle. He rubbed his palms together for a time, waiting to dig up Li Wei's foundation. Fine, he probably wouldn't be able to dig up Li Wei's foundation, but it would be good to clear away a layer of dirt. He Yuan asked him something at this time. How will Mr. Luo go to the jadeite light auction? The devil ray isn't a good means of transportation. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment, then he laughed. Sister Yuan, you're joking with me too. Right now, there are people who are putting on airs and watching me make a fool of myself. Why would I do what they want? You're not going. He Yuan was a bit surprised, but she soon felt relieved. She let out a sigh of relief. It's best if you don't go. I'm going. Why wouldn't I go? She clearly paused for a moment before continuing. What plans does Mr. Luo have? Cough. I haven't thought about it yet. These words seemed a bit irresponsible, but Luo Nan really hadn't thought about it yet. He wasn't naive or kind enough to believe that things would be over if he quietly seized back the 70-format laboratory and controlled the horn demons. The large amounts of equipment and information in the laboratory were still things he needed to get his hands on. Plus, it was very likely that this involved some matters of the past and relevant information that he urgently needed to understand. There was also the humiliation and threat of being toyed with in the palm of someone else's hand. This matter wouldn't be over even if he controlled 10 more horn demons. It was just that the first half of his time was focused on killing people. The second half was stuck in the external neuron, the abyss world, and the lamination interference technology. Matters like veterans and the Soul Order were interspersed in the middle, and he even exchanged a few moves with a true god. His brain really couldn't wrap itself around all of this. He was a bit confused when he heard He Yuan's question. He Yuan could understand Luo Nan's mentality. She didn't ask any more questions. She simply spoke of a plan. Her Majesty Empress Wu will go to D City next Tuesday. She will stay for a day before going to the Jadeite Light to participate in the event. This itinerary is quite reasonable. Her private flying shuttle will stop for an hour in the sea outside of Ban City. The coordinates are. If Mr. Luo is nearby, you can go meet up with Her Majesty Empress Wu. Luo Nan was a bit surprised. Her Majesty Empress Wu is participating as well. Chapter 835. Luo Nan thought that if he understood the actions of Her Majesty Empress Wu and the Xia City branch as him standing on the field to support them, wouldn't he be a bit too presumptuous? He wanted to say something, but he felt that it was hard to express himself. In the end, he just responded, I really can't decide on my side for now. He Yuan wasn't surprised at all. It doesn't matter. Just let me know before 9 o'clock in the morning. Luo Nan let out a breath. Thank you, Sister Yuan. Also thank Her Majesty Empress Wu, President Ouyang, and the others on my behalf. Luo Nan asked He Yuan about the recent situation in Xia City, then he ended the call. Then he sighed. The most willful time seemed to have passed. He needed to collect his thoughts. He couldn't be as unpredictable as Bai Xinyan. Speaking of which, that woman was clearly very smart. Why did she jump around so happily when it came to offending him? Oh, wait a moment. If this woman left. it didn't seem to be that simple. Luo Nan suddenly thought of something. He walked to the door and opened it. Sure enough, he saw Old Hand on the phone in the corridor outside. He was arranging the gathering of raw materials for the exoskeleton. Old Hand quickly hung up the phone when he saw Luo Nan open the door. He walked over and asked, "Mr. Mo, do you have any other orders?" Luo Nan thought for a moment and said, "Master Shou, you guys will have to work a bit harder during this period of time. Do the preparatory work well. Once the final technological process is confirmed, we need to see the finished product as soon as possible." Of course. Also, Luo Nan felt that it wasn't too appropriate halfway through his words. He forcefully swallowed the latter half of his words back down. Old Hand misunderstood his meaning. He patted his chest and said, "Our group of people is absolutely trustworthy when it comes to scheduling orders and working deadlines. We won't be disturbed by other things. I've always told the children that back in the wilderness, they needed to finish the work in their hands first even if they were to be stabbed outside. I've beaten them out of it long ago. Besides, Secretary Ian has helped us quite a bit these past 2 days. As long as Mr. Mo's conditions don't change, we'll just be wasting time with the Great Zay Order. We have several hundred people on our side. All of us are of one mind. You can be at ease." Old Hand spoke heroically, but he was actually probing Luo Nan a step further. Of course Luo Nan wanted to calm his mind. He didn't want to give him any other pressure. So he laughed and said, "I naturally trust you, Master. We also urgently want to make this deal happen. How about this? I'll ask Secretary Ian to arrange a time to invite the President out for a serious discussion in the next 2 days. This is good." Although Mr. Mo didn't give a definite promise, his positive attitude was enough to satisfy the veteran. Of course, it was mostly because of Mr. Mo's magnanimous attitude during the cooperation process. That set of extremely valuable exoskeleton design plan and processing technology was taken out without any concealment. For if veteran, who was still a technician in his bones, this could show his character more than anything else. When the veteran left, his mood was completely different from when he first arrived. Luo Nan was quite happy to see Luo Nan's mood lift. But the more it was like this, the more he needed to follow up and deal with this matter. He returned to the house and sat behind the workbench. He rested his chin on his hand and pondered for a long time. Finally, he made up his mind and extended his consciousness. Where is the process at? Inside the warehouse at the passenger terminal. Captain Jimmy rushed back after receiving the news. He was still wearing a bright shirt and beach pants. He wore wooden clogs on his feet. He was completely out of tune with the atmosphere of the temporary command center, but his mentality was more positive and urgent than anyone else here. The intelligence clerk responded, "According to Captain's intentions, the operation has already been submitted. Due to the lack of a supervisor in Ban City, it has already been sent to the East Asia Affairs Department. Get to the point." The intelligence clerk jumped in fright. His speed of speech instantly doubled. The Affairs Department has already approved it. 3 out of the 5 people in the process have already signed. Only the opinions of the director and the former supervisor are left. The deputy next to him frowned when he heard this. "Captain, if this is the case, then wouldn't it fall into the hands of Manager Bai?" Captain Jimmy was quite certain. Since she has left Ban City, she has separated herself from the concrete affairs. How could she have the face to compete with me, a first-line supervisor? I endured for 3 days before I sent this application. I'm already giving her enough face. Her attitude, to put it bluntly, shows that she is unwilling to take risks. Now that she has already left, what is there to fear? Besides, the others have already signed, but she is still making excuses. I have to suspect that among the group of people we want to arrest, there might be some gigolos that she is keeping behind others' backs. Captain Jimmy tore off his open-chest floral shirt. Everyone, get to your positions. Let's try to settle this matter by tonight. We have been delayed in Band City for too long. The deep roar of the engine sounded as the giant armored airship shuttled through the vast clouds. With its huge size alone, it could deter a limited number of mutant birds living in the stratosphere and provide them with basic peace. At present, intercontinental civil aviation flights were increasingly using this type of vehicle, which was far larger and safer than large passenger planes, to defend against the threat of flying mutants. Apart from being slightly slower, there were almost no shortcomings. Of course, in the eyes of certain people, the result of the loss of efficiency was also very bad, so much so that they once again complained. The business strategy of the airline companies is becoming more and more conservative. In this way, the military's progress in the wilderness has become untrustworthy. In the first-class cabin, on an independent seat that resembled a capsule space capsule, Yukawa Aisuke was half reclining and half leaning back. His posture was lazy, which was rare in Band City, and he only read the news to pass the time of the long journey. He had just finished reading a report about a military operation in the wilderness and casually linked two unrelated matters together. The main reason was that he hoped that Bai Xinyan, who was separated by the aisle, would join in the process of idle conversation. Bai Xinyan gave him face, raised her eyelids, and glanced at him. I remember that this is a business under your name. So I have been working to promote the development of high-end aerospace business. There will be mutants in the stratosphere, and there will also be a few at the bottom of the thermosphere, but above 100 kilometers, it is still pure and safe. With the support of technology, I trust the environment there more. The corner of Bai Xinyan's mouth curled up. Sounds like a platform for your special aerospace medal. Yukawa Aisuke laughed. No, I just feel sorry for not being able to show off the outstanding performance of my private spacecraft. Miss Xinyan, I still think that you should accept my invitation and go to the venue in a more efficient way. Compared to efficiency, safety is more important. I said, traveling with thousands of people, this sense of security is more to my liking. Yukawa Aisuke glanced at the few figures in the first-class cabin. Forgive me, in a place like this, it is really difficult to understand the feeling of traveling with thousands of people. When there is an accident, you will feel it. Not only Yukawa Aisuke, but also the other passengers in the surrounding seats were surprised by this. Bai Xinyan, however, did not care at all. She immediately turned her gaze back to the projection area in front of her, supporting her cheek with her hand. Yukawa Aisuke looked at Bai Xinyan's side profile, slightly lost in thought. Fortunately, his rationality quickly won over him. He looked over and saw a few words in the virtual work area, unable to hide his curiosity. That arrest order again. Chapter 836. Yukawa Aisuke's eyes and ears were extremely well informed in the secular world of Band City and most of the inner world. I heard that it involves a few hundred people from a certain Hengduan tribe. It's a little troublesome to deal with, but as long as the military and police cooperate well, it's not a big deal. Bai Xinyan answered lazily, is that so? Yukawa Aisuke felt that there was more to this than met the eye. You suppressed the Tianqi operation team and didn't let them test your sword. Other than offending people, there's no benefit to it. This doesn't seem like your usual style. My usual style. Bai Xinyan glanced at him again. Looks like you know me better. Have we slept together before? Yukawa Aisuke was captivated by Bai Xinyan's gaze. He didn't feel it, but he felt like his chest had been hammered and he couldn't speak for a moment. There was no way to continue this conversation. When he thought about it again, after knowing her for so many years, he really didn't understand Bai Xinyan's usual style. This woman's actions were too temperamental. That was not the right word to describe it. It was more appropriate to say that most of the time, it was impossible to tell whether Bai Xinyan was happy or angry, and the situation had already deviated in an unbelievable direction. Of course, Yukawa Aisuke also knew that most of the time, Bai Xinyan did not have a choice. Some of the things she did were not of her own will, and she suffered on behalf of others. However, his ability and willpower to carry out all kinds of orders to the end without even blinking was also intimidating. Therefore, in the circle, some people called her black-hearted salt, and some even called her unscrupulous spokesperson, mocking her for being a puppet placed in front of others by powerful people, and saying that one had to be prepared to be betrayed at any time. I must be crazy, why did I want to come out with her? In fact, Yukawa Aisuke understood. He gave up his comfortable private spacecraft and decided to take a civil flight with Bai Xinyan at the last minute. To put it bluntly, it was to get out of the circle of trouble in Band City as soon as possible. It was sad to say that Band City was his home base, but now he was running away from it as if he was fleeing from a disaster. It was an abyss of suffering, and even as the head of the Yukawa family, he couldn't bear it. As the saying went, it was easy to invite a god, but hard to send him away. He had invited the two gods from the Amaterasu cult and enjoyed the convenience they brought, so he had to bear the price. In other words, he had come uninvited. Yukawa Aisuke sighed unconsciously. At the same time, he clearly heard Bai Xinyan's sigh from the other side of the aisle as well. The two sighs were strangely synchronized. Oh, this is rare. It wasn't that he sighed at the coincidence of the timing, but rather that Bai Xinyan rarely showed her emotions. He had just said that this woman was simply a cold-blooded execution machine. What was she doing now? Without waiting for Yukawa Aisuke to ask, Bai Xinyan said softly, Aisuke, I heard you have a lot of women outside. Are we that close? The corner of Yukawa's mouth twitched. He really wanted to do what Bai Xinyan had done just now and fight back. But the reason he provoked Bai Xinyan in the first place was because he wanted to chat with her to relieve his boredom. Then he thought about the 20-hour-long flight ahead and decided to be magnanimous. Yes, I'm ashamed that I don't have a good grasp of such relationships. As he spoke, Yukawa Aisuke glanced at her from the corner of his eye, trying to figure out what this woman was up to. Do you usually use them to entertain guests? Hey. You're not going to be unreasonable about this, are you? Ahem, if you want to use this standard to judge me and consider the future of our relationship, I will be very disappointed. The topic was a little wild, but Yukawa Aisuke was not a fledgling. To put it bluntly, they were just teasing each other. As a man, he could accept such an atmosphere. However, Bai Xinyan's expression looked like she was discussing a very serious topic. Even though Yukawa Aisuke did not confirm it, she continued to speak according to the established inference. Now, there is such a poor person. She followed your instructions to entertain guests and asked for something from them. But the guests found out, and it caused some trouble. Faced with the anger of the guests, what would you do, Mr. Yukawa? Oh, you don't have to answer that. Let's move on to the next question. If Mr. Yukawa was even more unlucky and reincarnated as this woman, faced with such a situation, what would you think? What would you do? Yukawa Aisuke let out a ha, but did not say anything else. Bai Xinyan smiled and did not look at the other's expression. She extended her finger, verified her authority in the virtual workspace, and prepared to sign the application. Yes or no this time? The answer is already there. Bai Xinyan was halfway through her sentence, but the rest of her words were strangely stuck in her throat. Her finger, which was already in the projection area, froze. She tilted her head slightly, trying to look across the aisle to the opposite side. However, before she could react, the voice from the other side sounded again. Before making a decision, it's never wrong to consider the consequences. Bai Xinyan's finger, which was in the projection area, subconsciously curled back halfway. You could have lived a good life, but you insisted on creating an irreconcilable situation. The way you people think is really strange. It was still Yukawa Aisuke's voice, but his words were full of admonishment and regret. There was a subtle difference from before. And that tone and speed of speech, especially the resentful and distressed tone at the end. Sinyan finally aimed her gaze at the target, and what she saw was still Yukawa Isuke's face. But on this face, the lower half of the mouth opened and closed, the lingering sound lingering, the upper half, especially around the eyes, especially around the eye sockets, was tight and twisted, almost bursting from the bulging eyeballs. Inside, there was an unstoppable sense of confusion and fear. Sinyan was a little dazed. She looked at Yukawa Isuke on the other side of the aisle. She looked at this powerful figure who could make half of Osaka shake with a stomp of his foot. He raised his right hand in an extremely stiff posture. It was as if there were invisible ropes tied around his arm. Every movement was like a bondage in pain. It took Yukawa Isuke a full 5 seconds to place his palm on the front of his face and press it down. Sinyan could already confirm that he wanted to cover his mouth, to seal his lips, teeth, and tongue, which were completely out of his control. There was no doubt that this was an extremely stupid move that would not work. But when a person suddenly lost control of a part of their body, they could only watch helplessly as they became someone else's mouthpiece. No one could say that their reaction at this moment was more sensible than Yukawa Isuke's. With a loud slap, the palm finally landed on Yukawa Isuke's forehead. It sealed his eyes, almost flattened his nose, but it still could not stop the mouth that was out of control. Yukawa Isuke still spoke in a fluent voice. The method might be a little rough. I originally wanted to have a more private conversation and discuss it, but everyone's defenses are different. Sinyan's mind suddenly flashed. She suddenly stood up and shouted at Yukawa Isuke, who was still sealed by the palm and twisted face. Calm down, he can't completely control you. Chapter 837. Most of the people here were reputable people in Osaka's circle. Of course, there were some who knew Yukawa Isuke and wanted to ask about it. Currently, other than the 2 people involved, the others only thought that there was an argument. On the other side, the air stewardess tried to rush to the scene, but soon, a few burly bodyguards had already overtaken her and surrounded Sinyan and Yukawa Isuke. Mr. Isuke, you, the head of the Yukawa family's bodyguards, Kitano Tsukido, rushed to the front and wanted to ask what was going on, but when he saw Lord of Stars, Chapter 516, Upgraded, Part 1, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 838. Kitano Tsukido's reaction was very fast. The chain of clues was also very complete. However, there wasn't much of a difference between ability users and ordinary people when it came to the level of imagination. If he could think of it, then the few important people in the first-class cabin who knew the relevant information would also be able to think of it. Infrasonic wave array. The person who called out with a trembling voice was quite obvious. The person who called out wasn't brave enough. His voice was trembling and his legs were trembling. He lost his balance and nearly fell to the ground. Fortunately, someone supported him from behind, but it still caused a commotion. Kitano Tsukido swept his gaze over and recognized the identity of the person who spoke. He was a senior official of a certain department of the Sakura government. He was a well-known figure among the important people in the first-class cabin. At the very least, his words were easy to believe. Makoa, this idiot! Kitano Tsukido cried out in his mind. The people present might not know about the Cage Master, but the infrasonic wave array was a standard part of the city's defense. The degree of perception and understanding of it instantly increased. People couldn't help but think, why did the Makoa official say infrasonic wave array? Why did he have this kind of reaction? Everyone was on an airship tens of thousands of meters high in the sky. This was the information age. Even vague fragments of information could be found online. If the information couldn't be found online, they could still ask. Which of these people in the first-class cabin didn't have relatives or friends in key positions? The first-class cabin was instantly enveloped in a chaotic and extremely negative atmosphere. Phone calls were made one by one. Even if not everyone could obtain the complete information, they could still communicate with each other. A rough outline would be pieced together sooner or later. Kitano Sakito's head split into two. From his understanding of the mental side, since Luo Nan used negative emotions to invade Yukawa Aishuk, then it was very likely that Luo Nan used the emotions of other people to carry out his plan. Wouldn't this situation be like a fish in water? Kitano Sakito took a deep breath. He used his own face to assume an even fiercer posture. Mr. Maekawa, and everyone else, please calm down. Return to your seats right now. We have the situation under control. At the very least, there were no visible intruders at the level of this group of people. No matter what you guys did to Mr. Yukawa, it has nothing to do with us. Kitano Satoto almost punched this random person out of the airship. Fortunately, there were still some smart people here. The guy who had just said something stupid was immediately stopped, and the vice minister of Maekawa, who had exposed the dangerous situation earlier, was pushed to the front with a bitter face. We need to be treated humanely. The situation we're facing right now is not something we want to see. We did not interfere in the grudge between Mr. Yuchuan and Cage Master Teacher, and we do not wish to do so now. We're innocent, thousands of innocent passengers. This senior bureaucrat was quite good at handling his emotions very well. His trembling voice and body were rather contagious. So much so that two ladies started to cry. Well said. This guy who took the citizen's tax and sat in first class wasn't completely useless after all. This was one of the most appropriate negotiation methods that Kitano Satoto could think of. Although the cage master often took out the infrasonic wave array and swung it around, he only pulled the trigger once, and the range was controlled. As long as they could stop this killer weapon, they would have a chance to catch their breath and even counterattack. Thinking of this, Kitano Satoto's gaze turned to Xia Hui, who was sitting on the back of the mountain. Xia Hui was holding the Magatama tightly in his hand, and a faint light seeped through the gaps between his fingers. Was it useful? Kitano Satoto really wanted to ask this question, but Xia Hui didn't respond. Yukawa Aisuk, who was firmly restrained in his seat, turned his gaze over and sighed. I'm clearly the victim. Kitano Satoto's face was dark, and he didn't make a sound. Luckily, the vice minister of Maekawa had already gotten into character. He took the initiative to say, Mr. Luo Nan, no, Mr. Luo Nan, please consider the innocent passengers on the airship. Thousands of people, thousands of families. If anything happens, it will be an irreversible tragedy. Yes, it really is a tragedy. Yukawa Aisuk's face revealed a huge, strange smile. Actually, if it weren't for you guys messing around here, I would have already said goodbye and left. Mr. Scallop, are you done messing around? Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Everyone's gaze is focused on the face of Xia Hui, who had been silent for a long time. But before they could ask anything, a bright light lit up in front of their eyes. It was so piercing that everyone subconsciously averted their gazes and shielded their eyes. Yukawa Aisuk, who was forcefully restrained, also narrowed his eyes. But soon, he instinctively opened them, allowing the strong light to penetrate his pupils. Tears flowed from his eyes, and his body trembled. Actually, this light was good for him. The light on the material plane was projected onto the mental plane, and it turned into a dazzling sun. The heat emitted by this sun was quite compatible with Yukawa Aisuk's mental structure. Everywhere the light went, there was a subtle and clear response. This way, the intruder from the outside world would naturally be exposed. Indeed, the intruder Luo Nan was partially exposed to the sunlight. In fact, if it was a simple and crude invasion from the outside, this Magatama would have automatically reacted and repelled it. There was no need for Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain, to stimulate it with external power. But that kind of spontaneous reaction would not be as strong as it was now, and it would have a considerable follow-up power. That's it. The corner of Yukawa Isuke's mouth twitched slightly, showing that the Magatama's counterattack was somewhat effective. Luo Nan's degree of control over Yukawa Isuke was somewhat reduced, and he really did not plan on exerting his strength a second time. Don't even think about running. The unyielding voice came from Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain. After the Magatama's power was completely stimulated, Xia Hui's small body seemed to have expanded by a size. His face was bright, and his facial features and 7 orifices were all connected to the Magatama's light. This was the case on the material plane. On the mental plane, the special symbolic sun, under the blessing of Xia Hui, produced even more changes. It activated certain factors within Yukawa Isuke's frame, causing it to sprout and rapidly grow into an invisible thicket of intertwining branches and leaves. The thicket could sense the changes inside and outside, and it locked onto the completely different nature of the intruder. Its roots and leaves continued to grow, like long ropes of chains, in an attempt to bind and imprison the intruder. The changes in configuration are really beautiful. The image is also very unified. Yukawa Isuke sighed in admiration. Is this a simplified version of the Fusang pure wood? On the other side, Bai Xinyan suddenly asked, "Are you from the Amaterasu order?" The person she was asking was naturally Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain. The latter, who was controlling the Magatama, did not respond immediately. Instead, Kitano Tsukido explained, Yamato was born in a family of Onmyoji masters. He later became a disciple of the Pope. In the time it took to say these 2 sentences, Yamato Xia Hui had a better grasp of the situation. He interrupted Kitano Tsukido with a clear voice, "I will lock onto the intruder's position and immediately contact the radar or satellite positioning system. He can't be too far away from here." Bai Xinyan frowned while Kitano Tsukido's eyes lit up. In fact, he had a belly full of anger right now. If he could find Luo Nan's position and Luo Nan had a missile launch button in his hand, he would press it without hesitation. Don't complicate things. Bai Xinyan hesitated for a moment before advising Kitano Tsukido, he's already retreating. This is just a warning. Just. Kitano Tsukido's eyes were as sharp as knives. Miss Bai Xinyan, the Yukawa family respects your opinion, but we hope that you can respect our profession. If that person can come once, then he can come a second time and a third time. You guys can't do anything to him. In the vast Pacific Ocean, at an altitude of 10,000 meters, how were a bunch of ordinary people going to deal with the powerful ability users who were riding the flying devil rays that were several times faster than the speed of sound when they were riding on civilian airships that seemed stable but lacked countermeasures? You guys can't do anything, but that doesn't mean that the order can't. Mountainback Xia Hui responded. He turned his head and used a cold and arrogant gaze to cut across Bai Xinyan's face. Unrelated people, please keep your distance. Don't interfere with my casting. At this moment, Mountainback Xia Hui naturally became the person in charge. Even Kitano Tsukido had to give in to him a bit. Because at this moment, Mountainback Xia Hui was no longer just an external bodyguard. He represented the stance of the Order of Amaterasu. Bai Xinyan raised her eyebrows. Your Yukawa family is willing to be the bait. Kitano Tsukido's expression was very ugly. As the head bodyguard, he felt that his authority had been violated. But it was useless to say anything now. Mountainback Xia Hui's mouth was already flowing with a mysterious and incomprehensible incantation. The incantation buzzed in the half-sealed space. Yukawa Isuke was still squirming with his crooked and twitching mouth. He complained, "Why do you keep looking up? The Order of Justice doesn't do this. Is this the difference between the Order of Ideals and the Order of Gods?" Some of the people present understood these words, some did not, and some pretended not to understand. In short, no one responded. Kitano Sukido and the group of bodyguards stared at Yukawa Aishuk's body. Xia Hui continued to chant his incantation, while Bai Xinyan continued to retreat quietly. At this moment, Yukawa Aishuk's eyes followed her and locked onto her position. He transmitted the attention and pressure hidden behind the layers of clouds and the void. Maybe everyone should be open and honest for once. Soldiers are soldiers, generals are generals. Even if we can't negotiate, we can still fight. My words may be a little childish, but it's really boring for you to keep knocking on my door like this. Bai Xinyan had a bitter smile on her face, but she had already made up her mind not to speak. She had a strong premonition that the less she spoke now, the less trouble she would have in the future. If she could survive this escalating situation, seeing that Bai Xinyan was refusing to cooperate, the other side looked a little depressed. Forget it. Maybe I shouldn't have come today. I'll find a more suitable method next time. I've got you. You use a lot of exclamations. What? This sudden sentence caused Xia Hui's thoughts and emotions to stagnate. He was, after all, a Class B mind master, and he was very sensitive to the relevant fields. With this reminder, he did not let himself be led around by the nose. Instead, he suddenly realized a crucial point. Wasn't the feedback from the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure a little too slow? It was also at this moment that Yukawa Aishuk, with his crooked mouth and slanted eyes, revealed a horrifying smile. That Pope of Baji didn't teach you seriously. Such a complicated configuration. You know how it works, but you don't know why. How can you succeed? Under the effect of the Magatama's power, Yukawa Aishuk gradually lost control over the structure of Yukawa Aishuk's body and soul. But the muffled voice in his throat was like a highly viscous acid. It sprayed out and adhered to Xia Hui's face and soul, burning and penetrating. There were two waves of pain. The first wave was the pain of being pierced in the deepest and most private corner of one's heart. The other wave was the unique sense of danger that came from the mind. Oh no, I've been hit. Without giving Xia Hui a chance to analyze it in depth, in the spiritual plane that he saw and sensed, the exquisite composition that had been unfurled actually began to slowly roll back. It was retracted. Xia Hui's eyeballs nearly bulged out of their sockets like Yukawa Aishuk's. His consciousness played no role at all. In fact, it was just as Luo Nan said. The Pope of Baji gave Xia Hui the method to stimulate and maintain the Magatama's power, but she did not give him the method to use it flexibly. The Pope of Baji did not go so far as to be selfish. It was mainly because Xia Hui had not reached that level. He did not possess the knowledge reserves. Every structure, every section, and every detail of such a complex structure would affect the entire structure. Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain, was able to maintain the stability of the whole structure and successfully act as a fulcrum to sense and feed back information. He was already worthy of the role the church had given him. But this kind of role was not enough in the face of the orderly retraction of the configuration before his eyes. Spilled water was hard to retrieve, but everything that appeared on the mental plane was simply like reversing time. The power of the Fusang divine tree that had already unfurled was retracted bit by bit. It came back the way it came. There was not a trace of error, not a bit of wastage, but even on the mental plane, the circulation of energy had to obey basic laws. How could entropy increase and entropy decrease consume the same amount of energy? The most terrifying expenditure of the effect of reversing time was the astronomical calculation of the law. It consumed Luo Nan's brain power and control. He did it if he wanted to. But the remaining portion was completely squeezed back into the power of the Magatama, and this power was suppressed back to its original state. Xia Hui and the Magatama were affected by the entire activation mechanism. To a certain degree, they were one entity. There was no need to consider the boundaries of the reverse retraction. The retraction of the Magatama's power took advantage of the situation and pushed Xia Hui back in time. Of course, this was an exaggeration. His mental state and mind were completely unprepared for the retraction of the Magatama's power. His entire body was crushed to the point of suffocation. His swollen body instantly deflated. Xia Hui's body looked like it had its bones pulled out. He fell limply to the ground, unconscious. Phew. That was close. Yukawa Isuk sighed as he looked at Xia Hui, who was on the back of the mountain. I almost got myself into big trouble. Fortunately, Luo Nan had fought with the propping mulberry tree system of the Amaterasu cult many times over the past few days. He had seen the brain demon, the horn demon, the fat dragon, and many other similar tricks. Only then was he able to come up with this method of reverse sealing. Of course, this was also because he saw the opportunity quickly and made use of his understanding of the configuration of the great divine treasure of the Fusang divine tree. He also made use of the opportunity when Xia Hui was controlling the Magatama on the back of the mountain and had no time to pay attention to anything else. He took the first step to induce his negative emotions, giving him illusions and misleading him, distorting the feedback of the entire sensory channel. Just this skill alone was enough to prove that he hadn't been communicating with Mr. Bai for half a year. But the more it was like this, the harder it was for Luo Nan to deal a heavy blow to Bai Xinyan. He didn't have much hope that the previous threats would achieve anything. Also, sealing off the mountain back of Xia Hui might not solve the problem once and for all. Perhaps choosing to come here today was a mistake in itself. Luo Nan brought Yukawa Aishuk to Sai, breaking the deathly silence in the first-class cabin. He was still the center of attention. Everyone's gazes were filled with fear, bewilderment, and ignorance. At least at this very moment, every single one of them had basically lost the will and confidence to control their own lives. In reality, their fates of life and death depended on Luo Nan's will. It depended on a single thought. This included Kitano Sakuto, who had clenched his fists but couldn't find a target to exert his strength on. This head bodyguard stared blankly at Xia Hui on the back of the mountain. He looked at his temporary partner. Xia Hui held the Magatama that was no longer glowing. Xia Hui curled up on the ground. Xia Hui's aura was completely restrained and sealed. It was as if Xia Hui had been sealed into an invisible container. The connection between the inside and the outside was completely severed. This wasn't a knockdown or an extermination. This was a seal. In a way that he couldn't understand at all, this was a B-rank psychic. Kitano Sakuto didn't know what he was feeling right now. He turned to look at his employer and tried to converse with the soul deep within the frame of his body and soul. Don't go too far. The words squeezed out from his throat proved that this head bodyguard was completely at his wit's end. Was it too far? Of course, Luo Nan knew that Yukawa Aishuk's 7 orifices were bleeding. If it wasn't for the support of his will, Yukawa Aishuk's situation would have been even worse than Xia Hui on the ground. Luo Nan had forcefully reversed the structure of the Fusang tree just now, causing the power that Luo Nan transmitted to him to be a bit excessive. With the strength of Yukawa Aishuk's frame of body and soul, this wave of power was enough to cause serious injuries. But Luo Nan wasn't going to feel apologetic. If Yukawa Aishuk knew the role he should play in this world and stayed in his position, he might be able to live for a few more years. Under the influence of Luo Nan's will, Yukawa Aishuk's bloodshot and murky eyes adjusted slightly. He stared at Kitano Sakuto without saying a word. Kitano Sakuto's fleshy face twitched a few times. The ominous glint in his eyes finally dimmed. He waved his hand weakly. The 2 bodyguards who had been restraining Yukawa Aishuk's body were now stiff. They stared at their boss with wide eyes. When they saw the gesture, they felt as if they had been granted amnesty and quickly backed away. One of them even tripped over Xia Hui, who was on the ground, and almost fell down. Yukawa Aishuk slowly got up amidst this bewildered atmosphere. He bowed slightly to the people in the first-class cabin. Let's call it a day. My abrupt visit has caused inconvenience to everyone. Please forgive me. No, no, no. Please don't mind it. The Maikawa undersecretary made an example of himself. He bowed 90 degrees to Yukawa Aishuk. Please don't mind the dishonorable role I played in this incident. Yeah. Please don't mind it. You're too kind. I don't want to die. The first-class cabin was a boiling cauldron of voices. While everyone was expressing their stance or venting their emotions, Yukawa Aishuk's bloody and swollen face turned to the back. It was the entrance to the first-class cabin. Sir, you can't do this. You can't go up. The air stewardess's voice was urgent and trembling. It was rare for her to fulfill her duty, but it was pointless. The sealed partition door opened. A middle-aged man dressed in a suit and leather shoes walked in. He looked like a business elite. The man's face was flushed red. His feet were a bit floaty. It was as if he was drunk. However, his eyes were very bright. When he cast his gaze, it was as if the sun was shining down from the sky. Chapter 840. The drunk business elite pushed himself up from the VIP seat and moved over step by step. His fluttering footsteps and exceptionally bright eyes were completely different from normal, but he naturally formed an inexplicable harmony with the other abnormal creature on this side. At the same time, he also separated the other relatively normal fellows from him. It was this kind of situation that reduced the difficulty of understanding Yukawa Aishuk's nagging and complaints. A smart person like the Mayada vice officer of affairs instinctively discovered the conflicting and uneasy factors. But he couldn't retract his prawn-like body for a while. He awkwardly froze there. What was even worse was that Yukawa Aishuk and the others were in the middle of the first-class cabin. The drunkard who came up later had to pass by a group of people if he wanted to get there. This included the Mayada vice officer of affairs. The drunkard didn't give the Mayada vice officer of affairs a chance to think deeply before he passed by. He even said, "Excuse me." A surprisingly dry and hot palm pressed down on the former vice secretary of affairs' head, borrowing a little strength to continue moving forward. As for the former vice secretary of affairs, he had turned from a bent prawn into cooked prawn meat. His entire body was paralyzed on the ground, and he had lost consciousness. The sudden collapse of the Mayada vice officer of affairs didn't cause panic among the people around him. In fact, as these two extraordinary people gradually approached each other, any strange situation seemed to be within reason. Moreover, the drunkard was still talking, attracting most of the attention. My job is not up to standard. The number of devout believers is limited, and the ability users are even more scarce. Losing even one is a loss. Your drastic measures are very beautiful, but they are also giving me a difficult problem. His tone and wording were ordinary. Only the content of his words required others to think carefully. But even a person with a brain ischemia could understand at this time that another big shot had arrived. Yukawa Aishuk stood next to his seat. He stared at the newcomer and didn't say anything. He just sighed. On the other side, Bai Xinyan glanced at the unconscious mountainback Xia Hui on the ground. She didn't know the details of the drastic measures, but she could tell from common sense that the most suitable target for the new big shot's soul wasn't a business elite coming from business class. It was Xia Hui on the mountainback. These twists and turns only served to confirm that Luo Nan's methods were brilliant, and he possessed considerable foresight. Of course, if this big shot wanted to come over, it was impossible to stop him. At most, it would just be a few more unlucky people. The drunkard said something that seemed to be clear, but it wasn't. Then, he wandered off. It was not until then that the personal secretary of the Maikawa Vice Minister of Affairs had the courage to help his superior. But at this moment, he only lifted up a sleeve and half of the Vice Secretary of State Affairs, who was lying on the ground. The skin and flesh under the clothes seemed to have been put through several fires in a steamer, and the inside was almost melted. Ah! The sharp sound of the broken strings of reason turned into a screech of pain that came out of the secretary's throat. The future senior political official, who graduated from a first-class university, worked in a first-class department, and received first-class training, immediately peed his pants. His body bounced up a few centimeters and fell on the corpse of the Vice Minister of Maikawa. He lost consciousness. The screams, the strange smell, and the disfigured corpse. The sensory stimulation that came together and exploded in an instant finally tore apart the numb atmosphere caused by the high tension. No matter how strange the previous events were, they were far from being able to compare to the impact of the horror of death right before their eyes. The first-class cabin was in chaos. Almost everyone was retreating, fleeing, and running as far as they could. The relatively spacious first-class cabin was filled with a dozen headless flies. In other words, they could be ignored if they wanted to. After the drunkard touched the Maikawa Vice Minister of Affairs, he did not touch anyone else. It was as if the drunkard was just an accident. The drunkard smoothly made his way to the periphery of the small circle around Yukawa Aishuk. Most of the people in this circle were bodyguards. They were all professionals. They saw how this drunkard deprived the Maikawa Vice Minister of Affairs of his life, and now he was right in front of them. The more they understood the inconceivable things, the more they understood how terrifying this person, or the consciousness that was parasitic on this person's body, was. They also wanted to escape, but their leader, Kitano Sweto, did not respond. They hesitated and lost the chance to escape. They could only desperately shrink their bodies and try to put as much distance as possible between them and the drunkard. In this way, Yukawa Aishuk's protective wall was as good as non-existent. As the head of the bodyguards, Kitano Sweto still did not respond. In fact, he was probably one of the most dumbfounded people in the first-class cabin. When the drunkard was less than 2 meters away from him, he could already feel the abnormally high temperature. Only then did he wake up from his dream. He hurriedly and cautiously bowed. It's you. Kitano Sukito wasn't tall to begin with, and his bow made him even shorter. Therefore, the drunkard naturally ignored him, but his footsteps that had been moving forward also stopped there. There was no response from the other side. Kitano Sweto did not even dare to move his bent body. Not only him, but the people around him who had been influenced by what he saw and heard also instinctively bowed, each more obedient and humble than the last. There was also Bai Xinyan. She also bowed, her eyebrows drooping, and naturally held her breath. Outside the cabin, there was chaos as if a bomb had gone off, but inside the cabin, everyone was as silent as cicadas in winter. Between these two completely different scenes, the only similarity was probably the huge tension created by terror and absurdity, and the heart-wrenching pain that tore at people's hearts. Amidst the implicit and explicit agitation that tore at his heart, the drunkard spoke again. His tone was still very flat, but the information that came out of his mouth was like a flame that had finally burned through a curtain. It was a hot stream that rushed at his face. I am Hayaki. Kitano Sweto, Bai Xinyan, and the group of bodyguards subconsciously lowered their bodies a little more to show their reverence for this title. Yukawa Aishuk's mouth twitched. Hayaki. Pope. In the entire first-class cabin, only Yukawa Aishuk kept his body relatively straight. Of course, those who knew the truth knew that it was not the body that was straight, but the external soul that was supporting the body. The Pope of Hayaki, who had descended with the body of a believer, maintained a calm tone. It seemed that the slightest fluctuation could break the balance that had been maintained until now. Young man, you have a tendency to refuse communication. You are very hostile toward the Amaterasu order. The Pope of Hayaki was stating a fact. For the logic behind the fact to be established, more details needed to be filled in. This was equivalent to a kind of interrogation. So Yukawa Aishuk opened his mouth to say, hee hee. Luo Nan had no intention of responding. He just used Yukawa Aishuk's eyes and ears, as well as a wider and richer medium, to seriously observe and perceive, and to make adjustments. He adjusted himself to the best possible state. At this time, the first-class cabin that was hit by a terror bomb had already been lucky enough to rush out. But at the same time, they allowed the destruction of the terror bomb to spread to a larger area. Not a single person in the business or economy class was spared. Even the cockpit. The captain and the others should have already known about the unforeseen event that happened in the first-class cabin. They had not reacted before, but after a few minutes of delay, their reactions suddenly affected the entire airship. This colossus high up in the sky suddenly lowered its altitude and tilted. Although it quickly returned to normal, it still caused a group of people in the first-class cabin who did not have their seatbelts fastened to be in a rather sorry state. 2 bodyguards, who only cared about bowing, fell to the ground. They grabbed the handrails beside them with all their might to prevent themselves from crashing into the terrifying drunkard in front of them. At this moment, their hearts were about to explode. Bai Xinyan's body swayed, but she quickly regained her balance. She glanced outside the porthole. She didn't know when, but the airship had already sunk into the hazy layer of clouds. Smoke billowed outside the porthole, mixing with the curtain of night over the Pacific Ocean. As the 2 people at the center of the incident, whether it was Yukawa Aishuk or the drunkard, they were still mere mortals. They did not have the ability to take root in the swaying airship. During this period, they were swaying left and right, but there was still a conversation going on between them. It was mainly the Pope of Baiji who spoke. He even changed the direction of the conversation. Your spiritual configuration design is very good, but the spiritual realm is not a safe place. The higher you build now, the harder you will fall in the future. Is that so? Yukawa Aishuk replied casually. If the back of his head had not hit the outer shell of the space cabin next to him, he would have sounded more like a gentleman. The drunkard supported himself on the outer shell of the space cabin. He was barely able to maintain his image. At least his words were steady. Young people can be unscrupulous, but they should always think about the suffering in the future. As if you know anything. We can discuss and communicate. These people's original intentions were mostly the same, but they were too stupid and arrogant. Then, you are cunning and sinister, right? The airship returned to normal. Most of the people in the chaotic first-class cabin were still in a state of shock. The last round of dialogue, especially the one with the Pope of Baiji, had a seriously low intake and digestion. Comparatively speaking, Luo Nan had borrowed Yukawa Aishuk's mouth to reveal his emotions. They were very straightforward and easy to understand. It was very hard to accept. The other side was an extraordinary. Even though he had borrowed the power of his believers to descend in an incomplete form, his authority ranking in the inner world and the entire earth had been in the top 10 for many years. He was even in the top 5. This was especially true in the eyes of Kitano Sakuto and the other ability users who were registered in Sakura City. The Pope of Baiji and the Amaterasu order that he represented were like the vault of heaven that covered the skies above Sakura City. They were like the sun that brought about changes. Luo Nan's attitude, they could not see Luo Nan behind Yukawa Aishuk, but they could see the drunkard, on the other side laughing softly. Oh my, can you tell? Yeah. Sakura City is too close. Yukawa Aishuk's body fell to the ground as soon as he finished speaking. At the same time, the skies above the Pacific Ocean, which was supposed to be dark in the night, suddenly flashed with a powerful light. The light didn't fall from the sky, and it was as bright as day within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. Chapter 841. The airship in the stratosphere was in the nighttime region. It was pitch black outside, and there was nothing to see. Many passengers had taken off their sunshades, preparing to take a long nap and get used to the jet lag. At least, that was the case half a minute ago. The shock wave of the bomb of terror in the first-class cabin shattered the beautiful dreams of quite a few people. But what truly caused the passengers to wake up and go into an uproar was the endless, all-encompassing, unstoppable bright light. In this instant, it didn't matter if it was the thin sunshades or the thick outer shell of the airship. It didn't matter if it was the clear-headed eyewitnesses or the confused, frightened passengers. Everything was illuminated by the strong light. The inner walls of the outer shell, the skin, the bones, and the flesh, everything became transparent and even nothingness. Within the airship, all shadows were instantly swept away. Then what was erased were the differences between people, between objects, and even between objects. There were only panicked and petty souls that tumbled and screamed within the boundless strong light. Even though it was only for an instant, and it was like an illusion, it still exceeded the limits of what the vast majority of people could endure. The commotion on the airship got out of hand. Bai Xinyan still maintained her bowed posture, but she instinctively pulled in her shoulders and elbows. She shrunk a bit. As a woman, the feeling of being illuminated inside and out was truly terrible. But she could understand that this was the manifestation of the true gods of the Amaterasu order, the projection of power across space. It was just as the bastard who ran away said. This place wasn't that far from Ban City. 1,400 kilometers. As long as there was a tiny fulcrum, the two experts of the Amaterasu order could easily project their consciousness and power here. The only difference was the length of time and the intensity of the projection. Right now, it looked like the two of the Amaterasu order were yin and yang. One was restrained, and the other was unrestrained. Even the so-called restraint was only relative. In that case, had Luo Nan managed to escape from the pincer attack of the Pope of 100 Collections and true god Chenju? What do you think of this scene as compared to a daydream? A flat voice came into her ears. It didn't even bother to raise the question. It was because the voice was too flat that Bai Xinyan was unable to understand it immediately. She subconsciously asked. What? Only then did she realize that the person who had just spoken to her was the Pope of the 100 Communities. The second in command of the Amaterasu cult, who had descended from the sky, manipulated the puppet, which was obviously unwieldy, to raise its wrist to look at its watch. There was indeed a watch on the puppet's wrist, and it showed the time in Osaka. 22:17:45. After confirming the time, the Pope finally moved the puppet and continued to move forward. He passed by a few trembling bodyguards, as well as Yukawa Isuk and Yamakabe Xia Hui, who had fallen to the ground. Finally, he adjusted his posture and sat on the seat that Yukawa Isuk was sitting on. After sitting down, he no longer had to worry about maintaining his balance. His body language was more relaxed, and he was more like the one Bai Xinyan was familiar with, except for his face. While Bai Xinyan was evaluating the situation in her mind, the gaze from the other side was cast over again. Bai Xinyan also remembered that she had not yet answered the question of the Pope of Baiji. She tried to organize her words, but the other side asked again without a care in the world, I mean, Chiji's move just now, how is it different from the feeling of the white nightmare a few days ago? Bai Xinyan seemed to be able to hear the sound of the bodyguard's waist bones and knees cracking. She could almost hear the sound of the bodyguard's waist bones and knees cracking. Bai Xinyan was no longer surprised. She just couldn't understand why the Pope of the 100 Assemblies would suddenly ask such a completely unrelated question. The White Nightmare, May 7th, Osaka time, was an accident that affected the entire world. It was still rippling across the Pacific Ocean to this day, and was still in the ascendant. Because she was in the Eastern Hemisphere at that time, Bai Xinyan did not feel too much about it. Presumably, the Pope of the 100 Communities also knew. He was probably asking for the opinion of the person behind her. Bai Xinyan suddenly realized that she needed to adjust the priority of the White Nightmare incident. For the Pope of the 100 Communities to specifically ask about it, the impact on the inner world was no different from the Light of the Polar Domain incident at the end of last year. However, the Pope of the 100 Communities was destined to be disappointed. Bai Xinyan bowed and replied, "Xinyan's skills are insufficient, and my memory of that day is also blurred. It's difficult to compare." The Pope of the 100 Communities did not show any obvious disappointment or anger. Even if there was, it would not show on the puppet's face. In the time it took for these 2 or 3 sentences to be exchanged, the powerful light that illuminated everything had already disappeared. The outside of the porthole was still bright, as if they could no longer return to the natural nighttime. However, under the illumination of the bright light, the roiling clouds in the sky seemed to be even denser. Even though they were illuminated by the strong light, they still slapped against the porthole, changing shape and reminding people they were still tens of thousands of feet high in the sky, still one of the areas with the densest concentration of water vapor in the world. Bai Xinyan noticed the changes outside the porthole, and unconsciously became somewhat absent-minded. Up until now, this area had not experienced too obvious of an impact or turbulence, but just by looking at the interaction between the strong light and the sea of clouds, she could draw some conclusions and judgments. At this moment, she heard the Pope of the 100 Communities sigh, the condensation ring, truly a divine technique that should not have appeared on Earth. Bai Xinyan shivered slightly and turned her gaze back, just in time to see the slightly red eyes of the Pope of the 100 Communities puppets. The latter swept a glance over her body, but finally focused on her side. Bai Xinyan subconsciously followed the Pope of the 100 Communities' focus, and her gaze fell on her own feet. It was a suitcase that was lying flat in front of her seat. This thing was originally placed neatly on the inside of the seat, but because the airship had lost its balance and was in the process of righting itself, it had fallen out. This is a mimicry generator. The Pope of the 100 Communities' voice was very certain, and he even used the puppet's toe to kick the unconscious Yukawa Aisuke on the ground. He made a last-minute report, but there was no follow-up. His intentions are clear as day. Next to him, Kitano Sakito's eyelids were already twitching because of the Pope of the 100 Communities' actions, and he unconsciously shivered when he heard this. He opened his mouth to explain, but his mouth opened and closed a few times, but he did not have the strength to make a sound. Bai Xinyan, on the other hand, smiled. Otherwise, he would say that His Majesty is magnanimous. As soon as she finished speaking, the torrential rain and distorted light slapped against the porthole and the outer armor of the airship. In response, there was a dull explosion outside, and the hoarse noise of the airship structure creaking and disorderly. The people on the airship could even feel the obvious drift. The surging force and the strong light and clouds pushed the airship sideways for some distance. There was no doubt that from the cockpit to the economy cabin, there was another wave of exclamations and howls. The Pope of the 100 Communities looked at his watch again. 20 minutes and 4 seconds. Turn it on, we'll take a look. Chapter 842. This? Isn't that inappropriate? Bai Xinyan did not refuse. She was just puzzled. Regardless of how Luo Nan managed to deal with the encirclement and interception of true gods for over 2 minutes, it was easy to imagine that the area where the two sides wrestled was not on the material plane. On the mental plane, it was undoubtedly the abyss region. The mimicry map generator produced a mimicry map of the mental sea. As its name implied, it could only be used in the mental sea. There was an insurmountable distance between it and the main battlefield in the abyss region. Moreover, this was just a simulator. The lag was quite strong. It was not suitable for use in actual combat. The Pope of Chiji did not speak again. He just used the puppet's scarlet eye to cut across Bai Xinyan's face. Bai Xinyan was not going to be stubborn about this issue. She shrugged, bent over, and placed the suitcase back on the seat. She opened the suitcase, turned it on, and connected it to the projector. It was certainly not as effective as the one on Aisuke Yukawa's private airship, but the dense bubble scene still appeared. Bai Xinyan swept her eyes over the various parameters displayed in the projection area. She spoke truthfully, the debugging will take some time. There was another part of her that she did not say. Perhaps this high-level interception battle would have ended before the debugging was completed. The Pope of Chiji still did not speak. The puppet that carried his consciousness even narrowed its eyes. It looked like it was taking a nap. Of course, it was more likely that it was sensing the situation of the battle outside the airship. Bai Xinyan's communication was fruitless. She could only settle her mind and proceed with the debugging process bit by bit. But just as she said, this was not a problem that could be solved in a minute or two. On the other hand, the curtain of intense light outside the airship grew more and more intense. Faint rumbling sounds of thunder could be heard. At first, it sounded like it was hundreds of kilometers away, but in the blink of an eye, it was within reach. It shook the airship's window until it hummed. It seemed as if it would collapse and disintegrate in the next moment. It's been over 3 minutes. Bai Xinyan paid more attention to the battle outside. At first glance, the momentum of this battle was astonishing, but in fact, in terms of intensity, it was far from the strongest. The rhythm of the explosions was intermittent, and there was a high probability that it was a chase, but once the chase started, it would be endless. Was there a limit to being a true god? Or was Luo Nan too cunning? Or perhaps... You haven't finished debugging yet. The one who spoke was Kitano Sakudo. The head bodyguard walked over quietly and spoke in a low voice. His original tough and professional demeanor was almost gone. Without the hint from the Pope of Hyakonji, Kitano Satoto would not have come here just to investigate. After all, it was just a matter of opening his mouth. Did the Pope of Hyakonji need to put on airs like this? Bai Xinyan's drifting consciousness came back. She turned around to see what was going on. However, Kitano Sakudo happened to block her line of sight. She could only exchange glances with Kitano Sakudo and shake her head slightly, signaling him to pay attention to the surrounding environment. At this time, the cries from the business class and economy class had vaguely spread to the upper deck. Along with the shapeless corpses and unconscious and limp bodies, it looked like a scene from the end of the world. The collective emotional state is in a mess, and the spiritual sea is in chaos. The changes are too intense. Moreover, the computing power of a portable instrument is difficult to support the speed and precision of analysis at the same time. It's not suitable for actual combat. This was said to Kitano Satoto, but it was also an explanation for the Pope of Hakuji. I'll bring it over. Ha! Bai Xinyan did not understand at first. Kitano Satoto's eyelids drooped, and his eyes were almost invisible, but his movements were direct and clear. He reached out and picked up the mimicry generator that was still in a state of adjustment. He held it up respectfully, turned around, and took 2 steps to present it to the Pope. At this time, Bai Xinyan finally saw the current state of the Pope of Hakuji. The puppet that he had possessed was sitting in a somewhat casual posture. His legs were spread wide, his elbows on his knees, and his upper body was supported. However, the curve of his back was still bent, and his head was also drooping. His right hand naturally clasped his left wrist, and his fingertips tapped unconsciously on his wrist. He looked like he was thinking, but also looked a little tired. As for the mimicry generator that was already in his hand, he did not pay attention to it immediately. He still maintained his posture, and no one knew what he was thinking. Compared to the image of a god and its spokesperson that could not be looked at directly and could not be communicated with, this kind of behavior that was similar to a real life was more or less a buffer for the fragile hearts of the surrounding bodyguards. Therefore, probably because of Kitano Satoto's arrangement, the bodyguards began to work. They were trying to settle Yukawa Aisuke and Yamashita Xiaohui, who were stacked together at the feet of the Pope of Hakuji. At present, they had already carried Yukawa Aisuke away and placed him on the front row seat. They were about to carry Yamashita Xiaohui away when the tip of a polished leather boot suddenly tapped on his side shoulder. The leather boot belonged to the Pope of Hakuji. Puppet. Stop. Kitano Satoto, who was still holding the mimicry generator, reacted quickly and called for it to stop immediately. Everyone's movements froze for a moment. Only the Pope of Hakuji controlled the puppet to extend its hand and use it to replace the tip of the boot to press on Yamashita Xiaohui's shoulder. Bai Xinyan narrowed her eyes. Although the entire process was not long, she could see, and the others could also see, that the Pope puppet's fingertip was clearly trembling. Even when it pressed on Yamashita Xiaohui's shoulder, it only calmed down a little. She roughly understood why the Pope of Hakuji was putting on airs. For an extraordinary, high-intensity output from more than 1,400 kilometers away was not that easy to deal with. Without a solid fulcrum, the puppet had strength but was unable to use it. It also needed to perform micromanipulation to avoid bursting the small water pipe. From this, it could be seen that the majority of the Pope of Hakuji's energy was consumed on this. Even so, the problem of accelerated depreciation was unavoidable. The puppet's outstretched hand maintained a pressing posture on Yamashita Xiaohui's shoulder for over 10 seconds. During this time, the puppet's skin was clearly red. Fine sweat seeped out of its pores, and there were even faint specks of blood. It was only because the puppet had a drunken appearance that it was not overly eye-catching. But even with such strength, Yamashita Xiaohui didn't show any reaction. This technique. Bai Xinyan lowered her eyes. She made a hypothesis based on this. If the Pope of Hakuji had the support of a B-rank psychic like Yamashita Xiaohui, then the Pope of Hakuji would certainly be much more relaxed than he was right now. But Yamashita Xiaohui had fainted, and he seemed to be quite heavy. It was hard to say who would be at a disadvantage if they were to fight a protracted battle like this. TSK. Luo Nan's grasp of the situation and his control of the details was much more experienced than imagined. It was as if he was exchanging blows with extraordinaries from time to time. Where did he accumulate this experience and insight from? At this time, Bai Xinyan heard the puppet's breathing. It was as if there was a tube of iron sand in its throat, making a rustling sound. She relied on her many years of experience in researching the human body. Her first judgment was that Xiaohui had developed severe symptoms of laryngeal edema. Eliminating the cause of infection, his heart and kidney functions were most likely abnormal. Under the strong pressure, the internal organs of the human body had suffered irreversible damage, and the damage was continuing to worsen. There was no possibility of relief. Bai Xinyan was able to discern so much information due to her personal ability level. The others didn't have this ability. They could only passively wait. In particular, the bodyguard who was preparing to move Yamashita Xiaohui maintained a half-squatting posture. He didn't dare to move. He waited for over 10 seconds, and all he got was the Pope puppet's sigh. He felt a dry sensation suddenly press against the top of his head. He seemed to hear a cry of alarm, or perhaps it was the sound of the explosion outside the window. Then, it was meaningless to him. All sounds in the first-class cabin disappeared. The Pope puppet's sigh also disappeared. At the same time, the symptoms of laryngeal edema also disappeared. At the very least, it was temporarily alleviated. The price was the bodyguard who had fallen onto Yamashita Xiaohui. That person's skin and flesh were already limp. There was no breath left. The way he died was no different from the Maikawa Vice Minister of Affairs. The surrounding bodyguards all had deathly pale faces. As full-time members of the Yuchuan family, they had seen quite a few situations of internal handling. But this kind of situation where they were treated as a power bank was truly unprecedented. The important question was, whose turn would it be next? The hearts of the people were in turmoil, but now was not the time to pacify them. Whether it was Bai Xinyan or Kitano Sukito, neither of them cared about these things. From their perspective, what they needed to pay more attention to was the new clear instructions the Pope of Hundred Gatherings made after helping the puppet catch its breath. The hand that had just reaped a life flipped over. Its palm faced upwards, and it hooked its finger. Kitano Sakito's reaction was maintained at a high standard. He bent down again and, with absolute respect, handed over the mimicry generator. It was also at this time that he saw a cluster of greenish-black veins appear on the palm. It looked like the expanding capillaries under the skin, but it was more like the shadow of a tree with branches growing horizontally. Within the dark veins, there was clearly light flowing, filled with a different kind of vitality. But just thinking about its most likely source made one shudder. Kitano Sakito instinctively wanted to keep his distance from the Pope puppet. He wanted to retreat after completing his task. But the latter had no intention of taking over. Perhaps it felt that the distance and height were just right, so it simply used Kitano Sakito as a table. It stretched its hand over the control area of the device and began to operate it. Ha! Kitano Sakito's pupils dilated as he watched the Pope puppet's fingertips switch back and forth between the virtual interface and the physical buttons. Especially with the appearance of a business elite, he looked quite professional when he did such actions. But as long as one thought about the true identity, status, and image of the Pope, there was an element of absurdity in it. And as the Pope puppet operated, the mimicry image of the spiritual sea in the projection area connected to the device began to change repeatedly. The colorful water droplets constantly adjusted the angle of presentation, and at the same time, the colors quickly faded, forming a general grayish-white base tone. Kitano Sakito did not quite understand what this change meant. He subconsciously turned to look at Baisinyan, but he saw that Baisinyan's gaze had drifted to Yukawa Aishuk, who had just been seated in the front row. Baisinyan also noticed Kitano Sakito's gaze, but she had no intention of explaining. She moved her gaze away from Yukawa Aishuk and switched back and forth between the device and the projection area. She knew, and she had even explained to Yukawa Aishuk earlier, that this kind of change was a result of the repetitive spiritual waves in the surrounding area and the changes that had already become a routine. It was presented as the regular background radiation. This was also a sign that the initial analysis of the mimicry picture had been completed. Last time in Osaka, Baisinyan had spent at least 20 minutes to achieve this step. Even if the sensing range was wider this time, and the processing of more data, the difference was too obvious in comparison. Baisinyan could confirm that this device was directly sent over from the deep blue world. It was a product of the laboratory, and it had not been put into the market. Perhaps this was the only one on Earth. Then, where did the super operating ability of the Pope of the 100 Collections come from? Was it born with knowledge? Such thoughts could be written into the scriptures of the Church, but in the real world, it was better to use reasoning. From the simple background of the device, if the problem was not in the application or the circulation, then the problem could only be in the research and development stage. According to her understanding, the Apocalypse Laboratory had obtained inspiration from Luo Nan's cage theory to develop this device. They hoped to use it as a key tool to break the barriers that ordinary people had to the spiritual plane. They wanted to make it into a commercial hit and lay the foundation for the next step of their grand plan. The so-called return on investment, the small profit operation, and the like were just excuses to deal with investors like Yukawa Aishuk. As for what the grand plan was, Baisinyan did not know the full picture. She only heard that the laboratory attached great importance to it, and that even Li Wei was deeply involved in the research and development. But now it seemed that Li Wei was not the only one participating in the research and development. The relationship between the Apocalypse Laboratory and the Amaterasu Order was no longer concealed. Yukawa Aishuk had indeed played the worst trick. Focus. A low and hoarse voice flowed out from the throat of the Pope puppet. It was directed at Baisinyan. Your Majesty. You'll be the one operating from now on. Make sure that the interface is maintained on this baseline. The Pope puppet did not even raise its head. The arrangement was a matter of course. The slight loss of voice at the end proved that the organ tissue of the throat had not completely recovered. It was impossible for it to recover. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed. Perhaps it was because of this that the Pope of the 100 Collections did not play any tricks. She spoke very clearly. Qianju exerts force through the abyss region. Distance isn't a problem, but it is very difficult to accurately lock onto Luonan. Luonan previously reversed sealed the Magatama configuration and Xia Hui on the back of the mountain, cutting off our path of descent. His methods are brilliant, but it is hard to avoid revealing traces. We have grabbed onto a piece of his tail, but it is too insubstantial. It jumps back and forth between the material plane and the mental plane. Qianju probed down from the abyss region to the material plane, causing a large loss in precision. He needs me to act as the signal tower's relay gain. Only then can he encircle and intercept Luonan. Luonan knows all of this. He will most likely do something. The Pope of the 100 Collections operated the apparatus as she explained. In this way, Bai Xinyan had a clear understanding of the distorted bubbles of colorful light that gradually grew on the ash-gray background. Frankly speaking, it was a nesting doll structure. The innermost layer of the bubble was the signal tower of the Pope puppet. It appeared weak and fleeting, as if it could collapse at any time. The middle layer warped and fluctuated, flickering indefinitely. Specks of light would appear from time to time, but they did not form a shape. This was most likely the impact of the battle between the two sides. The details were no longer something that the mimicry diagram could analyze. The outermost layer was supported by a bubble. This bubble was much more stable, forming a boundary that was not a boundary. Perhaps, this was the control domain of a true god's extraordinary power? Of course, everything displayed here was just a mimicry on the mental C-plane. Let's not talk about accuracy. In essence, it was just the area swept by the aftermath. The main battlefield between Luonan and a true god was still the abyss region. Understand? His Majesty is using himself as bait. Bai Xinyan was just being polite. The Pope had only used a pious believer puppet. It was not even an ability user. How could it be considered bait? If Luonan really wanted to pull the firewood out from the bottom of the cauldron, then the true unlucky ones would be them, the passengers of the airship, if there was a slight deviation in the application of power. However, this possibility was meaningless to the Pope of the 100 Collections. What he paid attention to was on a completely different level than the others. The puppet raised its head and stared at Bai Xinyan with its scarlet eyes. Protect the apparatus. Collect data. If Qianju is unable to obtain the results of the battle, this place needs to be maintained for, at least 200 seconds. The mimicry generator will transmit the data to the laboratory's cloud. We need to clearly see his foundation. We need to clearly see what he's hiding behind his back. Yes. Bai Xinyan agreed. But she had a feeling that the Pope of the 100 Collections was not talking to her. Instead, he was shouting at Luonan, whose whereabouts were unknown within the boundless clouds. It was like a threat, but it was also like a lure. Yin Lo was at a loss out of habit. The wheelchair beneath Luonan didn't need her to exert force at this time. It automatically moved forward and left the room. Yin Lo hurried to catch up. She could confirm that this wasn't the work of the motor built into the wheelchair. Luonan ignored the commercial car parked outside after leaving the workshop. He directly controlled the wheelchair to move forward. Yin Lo arranged for the driver to go ahead first. She walked with small steps in her high heels. She followed behind him with clattering sounds. It was close to midnight in the Ping Trade Market. Even in the central area, there were very few pedestrians. The streets were empty, looking quite refreshing. But Luo Nan said, "How impatient." He narrowed his eyes as he spoke. A portion of the soul cloak spread out for thousands of kilometers, tens of thousands of kilometers. Hot bubbles bulged out from the intense light and high temperature. It was like a blazing furnace, roasting the slight fishy smell of the clouds and sea into a complex sensory stimulation. It was transmitted over a distance of 1,500 kilometers. He sensed it, experienced it, and responded to it. Of course, it was just as Luo Nan said. This series of senses was more like the stimulation of a virtual game, and it was a low degree of simulation. It was a bit like the déjà vu of an external neuron taking an offline test. He wasn't even as nervous as he was back then. If he didn't pass the test, he would most likely be in big trouble. Right now, the soul cloak was restraining and resisting him. He was playing hide-and-seek with a true god in the abyssal region. He arranged a few configurations within the clouds and watched them live and die. He didn't care much about winning or losing. It was just like the Pope of 100 Collections, who claimed to use her body as bait. What tense situation. It was all just talk. How could he be taken seriously? Well, for Bai Xinyan and the other people involved, this wasn't wrong. Only Luo Nan wouldn't. He couldn't do this. Chapter 844. The distance from the studio located at the center of the peaceful trade market to the yacht dock was approximately 5 kilometers. Whether it was Luo Nan or Yinlu, neither of them took this distance seriously. The two slowly walked forward, one in front and one behind, amidst the sound of rubber wheels and high heels hitting the road surface. Yinlu still did not understand Luo Nan's words. However, as they walked, she naturally assumed the position of a personal secretary. She held the handle behind the wheelchair, even though it did not have any practical meaning. Yinlu was still pondering over Luo Nan's theory of playing games. She could not understand the logic behind it no matter how hard she tried. She pondered for a kilometer before she heard Luo Nan's voice. "You were once the manager of Frost River Reality. How do you deal with those guys who cheat in games?" How do you deal with those guys who cheat and want to PK with real people? Yinlu stared blankly for a few seconds before she finally decided to say what was on her mind. Basically, you deal with them by suspending their accounts. In some cases, you'll use security and the police. Sometimes, you'll even apply to the SCA to lower the social privileges of those people. You'll ban them from entering relevant places and so on. It's quite difficult to find the SCA at that level. Luo Nan laughed and sighed. It was just as he said. Right now, he was playing a game. When it came to game skills, he and the two from the Amaterasu order could not determine who was superior due to the short amount of time they had spent together. However, Luo Nan occupied two advantages. One was the advantage of misplaced information. Luo Nan knew how the true god and the Pope participated. He knew their methods and calculations. Though those two had locked onto a Luo Nan, it was only an illusory phantom. An enormous error had appeared in their critical judgment. The other advantage was the bandwidth advantage. Luo Nan relied on the ability of the soul cloak to cover the entire world. He occupied an absolute advantage in terms of energy conduction and utilization. He also sealed off the preset signal tower a step earlier. While the true god and the Pope were still calculating whether or not there was a signal, Luo Nan relied on the ubiquitous water molecules to construct the global Internet of Things. He enjoyed the convenience of zero-time delay. Luo Nan did not know how he would lose if he simply played games under these conditions. The problem lay in the fact that the Pope and the true god were sore losers. They didn't really want to PK with Luo Nan's gaming techniques. Their goal from the very beginning was to lock onto Luo Nan's position in reality through the game within the clouds. This was to prepare for the offline real-life PK. This was very shameless. From Luo Nan's perspective, it didn't matter whether he won or lost the game. In any case, he had already achieved his goal of warning by Sinyen and Yukawa Aishuk. But if the two from the Amaterasu order locked onto Luo Nan's true location and confirmed that the target was hiding in their base, they would not be able to win. Ian Luo and Snake Tongue, who were by Luo Nan's side, as well as Old Hand and the group of vagrants who had a close relationship with Luo Nan's grandfather, would most likely not be able to survive once the conflict erupted. From another point of view, the reason why the True Gods and the Pope still had some misgivings in their headquarters, Ban City, and had to travel over 1,000 kilometers to verify their findings was also because of the existence of the source of interference. In their eyes, there should be a difference between Luo Nan and the source of interference. Especially since Luo Nan was following closely behind the airship. The influence of the space-time interference still existed in Ban City. This was more or less a new piece of evidence. At the very least, they did not think that there was no human figure riding a devil ray running and hiding in the hazy sea and sky 1,500 kilometers away. Even if they had their suspicions, they still needed further confirmation. With this analysis, the things Luo Nan needed to do were quite clear. He needed to maintain his advantage. He needed to interfere with the verification methods of the True God and the Pope. He needed to let the existing misunderstanding continue to exist. It would be best if he stayed away from reality and created layers of confusion. He needed to lure the two off topic and have some fear. Of course, he absolutely could not overreach himself and allow the other side to grab hold of his weakness. Luo Nan was very cautious. It was true that he occupied a certain information advantage. But ultimately, he was not sure what the two from the Amaterasu order were basing their judgment on. He did not know where they came from. Especially the True God who had run back to Ban City after screaming out that his soul had been magnetized. His understanding of the situation definitely exceeded the scope of normal Earth knowledge. Luo Nan wanted to think things over carefully, but this was not something he was good at. He could not find anyone to advise him. The conversation with Ian Lu just now was just a joke to adjust his mood. This was the result of stuffing a belly full of secrets. Luckily, the conversation between the Pope and Bai Xinyan gave Luo Nan an opening to take advantage of the situation. Didn't they say that I was nearby? Then I'll be nearby. He would not be able to hide it sooner or later if he just fooled around in the air. He needed to add a bit more to it. During the night stroll, Luo Nan carefully combed through his thoughts in his mind. He roughly sorted out the required configuration design. Then he extended his hand and waved behind him. You still have the one I gave you last time, right? Ha! Ian Lu, who had been stunned by Luo Nan's question, instantly became nervous. Mister, which one are you talking about? It's that fish. Luo Nan subconsciously lowered his voice when he said the three key syllables. He was a bit mysterious. The Devil Ray was a secret that absolutely could not be exposed in Ban City. Ian Lu had a serious expression. She had never seen Luo Nan speak with this sort of tone before. Many thoughts flashed through her mind in an instant. She calmed her mind with great difficulty and lowered her voice. Yes, mister. You. Luo Nan didn't say much. He just waved his 5 fingers. His meaning was very clear. Ian Lu immediately picked up her bag and wanted to take out the crystal ball with the devil ray sealed inside. But her vigilant mentality made her remember something. She hesitated for a moment before handing over the entire purse. Her body leaned forward, and her lips nearly stuck to Luo Nan's ear as she apologized. I'll have to trouble mister to take a look. Don't take it out for now. I've had a lot of eyes these past 2 days. Oh, that's right. The Deep Blue Walker Squadron, which was his yacht's neighbor, had put in quite a bit of effort these past few days. It was a bit better in the studio, but in a public place, there might be several surveillance cameras pointing at them. It's too early to talk about this. Luo Nan reflected on himself for a moment. He readily followed the advice and opened the purse to search for his target. From his perspective, the lady's purse was more or less a small maze. He could clearly sense the location of the crystal ball, but the complicated design of the purse still tormented him quite a bit. A minute later, Luo Nan extended his hand into the Kuan bag and finally grasped the crystal ball. He felt the marvelous sensation of the crystal ball being indistinguishable between real and illusory. He also felt the instant information that belonged to the devil ray transmitted from the void in between layers. He made a series of fine adjustments to the configuration outline in his mind. Chapter 845. What are these B***stars doing? Captain Jimmy crossed his arms in front of his chest and subconsciously tapped his feet. The rapid rhythm reflected his current terrible mood. At this time, he was supposed to be preparing for tonight's operation, but an unexpected incident had ruined all his preparations. The surveillance resources that had been fully activated had been reduced to something akin to catching an adulterer in the act. For the time being, no one could give him a response. From his deputy, Mendez, to the surrounding members of the action team, and the SCA officials who had just rushed over to work overtime but were proven to be a waste of time, they all averted their gazes to avoid the unfortunate incident. 2 minutes ago, a video from an intercontinental passenger airship began to spread on the internet. The suspected terrorist attack that happened in the first-class cabin of the airship was recorded from different angles by many witnesses, posted on different social media accounts, and linked with big data. It began to rapidly accumulate views and influence. Until now, there was still no clear explanation for the incident. In fact, even if a nuclear bomb exploded on the airship, Captain Jimmy would not care. The key problem was that Bai Xinyan, who was at the last point of the parallel approval process, was in the area where the incident occurred, and there was still no news of her. The operation approval process was once again stuck. Captain Jimmy felt like he was tripped. It did not hurt him, but it was very depressing. The mission against the remnants of the Soul Cult was actually not difficult, nor was it urgent or challenging. The reason why Captain Jimmy could not forget about it was largely because he wanted to compete with Bai Xinyan. He did not deny this. He finally had the opportunity to use the situation and the procedure to force Bai Xinyan to yield. Victory was in sight, but something like this happened. What kind of luck did Bai Xinyan have? Whether it was reasonable or not, that was what Captain Jimmy thought in his heart. The procedure went into a standstill again. Captain Jimmy had no choice but to pay attention to the development of the incident and try to learn the truth from the higher-ups. At the same time, he diverted some attention to the B***starred couple on the street. No matter what, these two were the people who had the most contact with the target, the veteran Shou Xiong and the other vagrants. In other words, they were also suspects, even if they had the blood flame order behind them. Captain Jimmy kicked the chair under the intelligence officers but tried to make his subordinates nervous again. Give me the plan. The one numbered A7. To deal with indirect suspects like Mr. M.O., whose background was clear but whose identity was unknown, the operation team also had a contingency plan. When the captain had nothing to do, he could go on a vacation. They even went up to investigate, but other than a bunch of exoskeleton parts and some strange compound materials, they didn't find anything new. Not finding anything is the prelude to a great discovery. Captain Jimmy could come up with over 100 reasons at any time if he wanted to make up a story. The current blood flame order, or to be more precise, Madame Halder's blood flame order, is like a stray dog. They ran from Xia City to T City, and it's said that they aren't doing too well. Under these circumstances, the second-in-command of the order accompanied this so-called Mr. M.O. to Saka City to purchase property and then conducted research and experiments midway. What a touching logic. Dor opened his mouth, but he suddenly discovered that he had nothing to say. Captain Jimmy used his terrible mood to make groundless and far-fetched claims. He forcefully wrung out a complete logical chain. Following his train of thought, even Menda felt that this of Mr. Mo was very suspicious. Hold on, this has nothing to do with us. Really? Are you sure? After a series of debates, Captain Jimmy felt that he had returned to his peak. He even laughed. He extended his hand and drew a circle in the air. He pointed out, "Why do I feel that their attitude is very unfriendly?" While Captain Jimmy was talking loudly in the warehouse at the dock, Snake Tongue furrowed her brows several hundred meters away on the yacht. That fellow on the other side was pestering her endlessly, but his senses were quite sharp. Especially when that group of people had entered a state of combat readiness. They were connected to each other and formed a network. They naturally formed a highly integrated offensive and defensive fortress on the mental plane. The spell probing she was used to before now seemed a bit rash. Her surveillance made the other party react, but it wasn't that easy to get rid of it. As an outstanding cursemancer, she was an expert when it came to curses, stimulation, and control of living creatures. At this distance, as long as there were mosquitoes or crawling insects in the warehouse, they could form a monitoring network. They wouldn't be affected by ordinary mental attacks. At most, they could see the information directly or indirectly. But she still had to say, the growth rate of technology was truly fast. Snake Tongue had dealt with Deep Blue walkers quite a few times in the past. In fact, ever since the Deep Blue platform appeared, it had always been the focus of the Inner World's research. Ability users had very complicated feelings towards this group of people that obtained extraordinary power through the transformation of the human body. Snake Tongue was no exception. But after wasting half a year in the cloud world and returning to reality, Snake Tongue discovered that she needed remedial lessons. More and more characters worthy of attention appeared on the Deep Blue platform. Let's not talk about superstars like Tian Bang, who was the #1 person below the extraordinary level. She felt that there were quite a few noteworthy points in this operation team she had randomly encountered. The problem right now was that Captain Jimmy had accidentally hit the nail on the head. He had a temperament of an unpredictable bomb. Luo Nan might not like this news. Ian Lee's call came in just as she was thinking. There weren't any pleasantries. She just wanted to remind her that Luo Nan would soon return to the yacht and that she needed to pay attention to matters during this time. It looked like the situation was quite urgent. Halfway through the conversation, Luo Nan became the one speaking. "Your Excellency." Snake Tongue's attitude immediately changed subtly. She carefully memorized the instructions and repeated them before responding, "Hey, I understand." Snake Tongue immediately got up when the call ended and headed to the yacht's storage area. At Luo Nan's request, a raw material processing area had been temporarily partitioned off. It was mainly used to process the compound raw materials he used daily, extract nutrients, and the like. Originally, it wasn't that particular. But in the past 2 days, it seemed that he had obtained a series of pre-processing techniques from an expert that could effectively increase his usage efficiency. Snake Tongue was a cursemancer. She was quite accomplished in the field of pharmacology, so she took over this heavy responsibility. She provided Luo Nan with the rough processing materials he needed for his experiments every day. It was said that these materials were used to make something like a sarcolemma. As she passed by the outer deck, she saw the commercial vehicle that had returned to the dock at Ian Lee's request turn around to pick up Luo Nan. The capricious orders were clearly controlled by Luo Nan's flickering inspiration. In fact, the yacht, which had already entered a half-resting state, became active once more under Luo Nan's will. The crew ran up and down, taking their respective positions. Snake Tongue had just finished preparing the materials she had accumulated over the past few days in the storage area when she heard the low hum of an electric motor. This was proof that Luo Nan had already arrived at the dock. Afterwards, the yacht would temporarily take him away from this densely populated area and into the depths of North Mountain Lake. Chapter 846. The commercial car went back and forth, Luo Nan boarded the boat, the yacht left the shore, and the boat drove into the center of the lake. There were no accidents in this series of processes. They were extremely compact, without any buffer gaps. Such a rhythm was rare for Luo Nan, at least from Snake Tongue's point of view. Ever since they got to know each other for a long time, the impression Luo Nan gave her in most situations was that he spent long periods of time pondering and delving. He was in an illusory and mysterious state of emptiness. Occasionally, they would interact, and he would be cold and hard, piercing into the deepest depths of one's heart. The current scene was more like someone whipping him from behind or rushing to the front to fight an intense battle. Snake Tongue originally wanted to report the latest intelligence on monitoring Captain Jimmy and the others, but she couldn't find an opportunity to interrupt. After Luo Nan boarded the yacht, he went directly to the warehouse area. He checked the raw materials provided by Snake Tongue and confirmed that they were sufficient. He didn't say anything, but a layer of smoke spread out from his body. The temporarily separated warehouse area wasn't that big. Whether it was Snake Tongue or Yinlu, they were soon enveloped by the smoke. Their figures became hazy and indistinct. What was this? Yinlu turned her head in shock, wanting to communicate with Snake Tongue. However, the two lacked tacit understanding in the end. Snake Tongue didn't pay attention to Yinlu. She just silently watched the roiling smoke beside her, as well as the more detailed components within. Snake Tongue wasn't able to discern too many details because her psychic senses were greatly restricted within this smoke. And the more she delved into the details, the more fuzzy her probing mental senses became. It was as if countless fine blades were sliced into pieces and scattered randomly. They were turned upside down and confused. In the end, she simply doubted her usual self-logic. This feeling was terrible. More importantly, it stimulated Snake Tongue. It made her remember that she had vaguely experienced this scene before. Yes, the cloud world, the mist maze. This was the bizarre location where Luo Nan had attacked, oppressed, and bound Gong Qi. Snake Tongue often boasted that she was experienced and knowledgeable, but she had never seen such a bizarre and despairing world in her entire life. It was precisely there that Snake Tongue and death overlapped. Perhaps it was just a hair's breadth of difference. No matter when she thought about it, she couldn't get rid of the feeling of suffocation. It was also there that she completely lost her freedom of life. Perhaps this included the future that she could look forward to. Snake Tongue's gaze shifted and swept over Yinlu's blurry face. This woman was curiously looking around as if she didn't know anything. This allowed Snake Tongue to have an even clearer judgment regarding the mist maze. That place was undoubtedly Luo Nan's top secret. Perhaps it was the core source of all of his abilities. Think about it. A sandstorm maze formed from 1 trillion domain fragments. Any random fragment from the maze would be a rare treasure on the inner world plane. How much of it was mixed in the smoke that filled the air? That place was a terrifying prison, but at the same time, it was also an incredible treasure trove. Even with Luo Nan's strength, he absolutely could not let it see the light of day for a long time to come. Unfortunately, he was involved. Even if he wasn't killed, he would have to pay an extra price. Snake Tongue was lost in a rare moment of absent-mindedness due to the awakening of her terrible memories. When her attention returned, she discovered that a dark red exoskeleton frame had appeared within the mist, sticking close to Luo Nan's torso at some unknown time. Where did this come from? The dark red was a rather eye-catching color within the ash-white smoke. It seemed to be flowing endlessly, as if it was the blood contained within the entire frame. Within the flowing bloody light, the connective tissue and muscle tissue fragments of the same hue seemed to be woven by invisible needles and threads. They stuck close to the surface of the skeleton, gradually taking shape. Correspondingly, the rough processing materials Snake Tongue had prepared, as well as the nutrients specially used to replenish the human body's energy, were consumed at an astonishing rate. They were swallowed into the depths of the smoke. Luo Nan possessed the ability to rapidly produce human cells and tissues, or perhaps he possessed the tools to do so. Snake Tongue still remembered how shocked she was the first time she saw such a scene. But now she was completely accustomed to it, and she knew that Luo Nan's ability had its limits. In the end, the exoskeleton frame was unable to form a complete body. It merely formed a thin layer of muscular-like structure. It wrapped around and covered most of the skeleton, and it stretched and contracted endlessly. It caused the entire frame to tighten and deform, but it also fit the contours of Luo Nan's body. Snake Tongue had seen a similar scene more than once in the past few days. The speed at which it formed was much faster than this time. Yes, she felt that Luo Nan's speed at forming the muscular-like structure was much slower today. There were even some areas that were a bit hesitant. Snake Tongue had just thought of this when she saw the mostly formed muscular-like structure in the chest and abdomen region of the exoskeleton frame burn into ashes. Bionic tissue began to grow wildly at the edges of the gap, spreading and bonding to fill the gap. There was a change in the design train of thought. Chapter 847. The victim's abdomen was meaningless. Snake Tongue cleared her distracting thoughts, and her line of sight pierced through the pervasive smoke. She saw that this blurry area still had certain restrictions. After eliminating the influence of obstacles, a relatively complete circle appeared on the whole. She vaguely understood Luo Nan's meaning. The exoskeleton is basically equivalent to a padding, but it's also an orderly operating system. It filled in the abilities that the body didn't have and increased the power that the body didn't have. The relationship between it and the main body was equivalent to the gear set that His Excellency had mentioned before, that coupling theory. The coupling between the inside and the outside will form an organic whole, amplifying one's own strength and stirring up even greater power in the world. That's right. You were the same back then. You understood it the moment you heard it. Luo Nan grinned his teeth in delight. He was a bit pleasantly surprised. The corner of Snake Tongue's mouth perked up, but the curve of her lips was mostly filled with bitterness. At this moment, the magnificent power raised by the gear set that was embedded in the void surged up from the depths of his memory. Moreover, as the timeline moved forward, it became more and more majestic and unstoppable. Back then, he had recklessly used his own small gear to pry open the big gear of the world. Today, just his existence alone was already a marvel of the world, unfathomable and unattainable. Such a change only took the time of a nightmare in the cloud world. Perhaps this change itself was a nightmare. At this moment, Yinlu came in with the metal box containing the wires. "Sir," she paused halfway through her words. Her gaze shifted between Luo Nan's and Snake Tongue's faces. She paused for about a second before she opened the case and displayed the relevant equipment. "The RAC wire is here." Luo Nan nodded slightly. He wasn't in a hurry to get into action. Instead, he continued to communicate with Snake Tongue about the corresponding concepts. "It is indeed a coupling, but there is one thing that is different from the last time. This time, I don't need to pry anything. Instead, I need to merge with the big gear set of heaven and earth so that it doesn't stand out. But at the same time, I need to make my own characteristics stand out. The work of integration will be completed in the addition stage. You must fully realize the coupling effect. This is the foundation. The work of highlighting will be completed in the subtraction stage. You must highlight the sense of design. Now, get ready." "Yes." Snake Tongue adjusted her breathing and took out the wire from the metal case she had already opened. She gradually understood. Luo Nan's conversation with her was actually to further clarify his train of thought. Therefore, During this period, the configuration design of the virtual workspace was adjusted to a certain extent. It felt more concise and clear. In comparison, Snake Tongue's operation phase was lackluster. She just appeared as an AI assistant. She followed Luo Nan's instructions and installed the wires in the designated locations. Snake Tongue had installed a total of over 30 wires, and they were arranged inside and outside the exoskeleton frame. They were like a mixture of neurons, muscle fibers, blood vessels, and other functional tissues. Every time a wire was installed, the exoskeleton frame would react, and it was an obvious change in shape. The muscle membrane structure produced by the transformation would also quickly cover it, making it look like a single entity. Snake Tongue didn't have the time to look at it in detail. She listened attentively to Luo Nan's instructions. She was engrossed in the installation and traction work. When the work was complete, she tried to look at the fruits of her labor as a whole. But she was stunned to discover that the scenery before her eyes was fading away. The smoke that practically covered the entire warehouse area was fading away without end. This wasn't a result of the leakage and decrease in concentration due to the tight seal. Instead, it corresponded to the steps of continuous adjustment. The chaotic dust within the smoke was like a jigsaw puzzle that gradually became orderly. The orderly layers gradually became clear, forming a stable and ethereal structure. It blended together with the surrounding void that she was accustomed to. The exoskeleton frame also blended inside. Within the fading smoke, the dark infrared exoskeleton, which had just pulled the wires and wrapped the muscle membrane, seemed to have been rubbed by an eraser. Its structure, color, and even substance all became faint and fuzzy. Then it disappeared one by one until it was completely hidden. In the end, only Luo Nan's figure remained in the middle of the warehouse area. He stood there quietly with his head slightly lowered. It seemed that he was pondering something. The smoke, the exoskeleton, and all the corresponding scenes were like an illusion. However, one only needed to see that the vast majority of the compound raw material reserves had been consumed and the empty metal case in Ian Lee's hands. Luo Nan knew that everything that had just happened was true without a doubt. Snake Tongue thought of Luo Nan's words from a few minutes ago, the large gear set that wanted to merge with heaven and earth. The merging was quite thorough. As for how Luo Nan was able to accomplish this, Snake Tongue really couldn't guess. The operation of this round far exceeded the scope of her knowledge structure. Snake Tongue was stunned, and Ian Lee's reaction was even greater. She blurted out a question. Is it done? A portion. I still need to test it. Luo Nan flexed and extended his 10 fingers as he spoke. After confirming that his movements were unhindered, he reached out to touch his face. With a slight movement, a smoke-like layer of fine muslin was peeled off. His facial features underwent a subtle change. Snake Tongue and Ian Lu suddenly came to a realization. Luo Nan had been using the identity of Mr. Mo for the past few days. His facial features had been modified by the muslin of invisibility. However, after interacting with him for a long time, his unique characteristics had unwittingly caused them to overlook the difference in appearance. From this angle, the disguise was quite a failure. Luo Nan didn't care about the thoughts of others. He used his fingertips to twirl the muslin in his hand, experiencing the marvelous state that existed between the virtual and the real. Then, he tossed it up. Snake Tongue and Ian Lee's attention naturally gathered over. The muslin of invisibility was practically weightless due to its special material properties. It easily broke free of gravity. It was like smoke or mist, stretching, shifting, and bobbing up and down in the air. Soon, a dozen seconds passed, but nothing happened. Another dozen seconds passed. Luo Nan's face was expressionless as he extended his hand and took off the muslin of invisibility. Ian Lu, who had been a chatterbox before, instantly felt extremely embarrassed. Luo Nan didn't say a word. He continued to twirl the muslin with his fingertips, searching for the feeling. The muslin of invisibility was a product of lamination interference technology, but it wasn't the core item. Instead, it was a kind of extension product. It wasn't a natural material. Instead, it underwent the effects of the so-called lamination interference spirit core. It underwent a transformation of quality and energy over the years, absorbing special particles from the outside world to weave itself into a strange object. The lamination interference spirit core was like a shuttle. As long as it existed, it would simultaneously accumulate and weave on both the material and mental planes, endlessly expanding the scale of the muslin of invisibility. It would also memorize a few commonly used patterns, making it easier to realize concealment and camouflage. From this point of view, once the experiment of the lamination interference technology was successful, the experimental product would certainly be able to form a special effect with the muslin of invisibility, and vice versa. Let alone a special effect, not even the most basic of interference effects could be seen. It was at this time that Snake Tongue bowed to show her respect. She acted as if she was completely convinced. Your Excellency's divine skill. Chapter 848. Luo Nan didn't show any joy towards Snake Tongue's praise. He continued to twirl the muslin and responded calmly, "It can be considered a success, but the design of the spirit core is still a bit lacking." What are they talking about? Yin Lo was confused. In terms of cultivation, she and Luo Nan really didn't have much of a tacit understanding. She was able to accept this fact, but right now, she was completely excluded from Luo Nan and Snake Tongue's small circle. She felt far too uncomfortable. Taking a deep breath, Yin Lo adjusted her state of mind and used the most honest method to participate. "Sir, what did you just do? Examine the interference effect between the constructed gear set and the outside world." Luo Nan chose Snake Tongue's description, and the source came from himself. Seeing Yin Li's blank expression, he explained a little more. "I hope to achieve 2 effects. Oh, it should be 3 effects. The first is that the newly constructed gear set can be seamlessly embedded into the big gear set of heaven and earth. This is basically achieved." Luo Nan reached out his hand and fiddled with it a few times. He didn't feel any obstruction at all. He gestured to Yin Lo to give it a try. Yin Lo reached out her hand in a daze, and without any obstruction, she touched Luo Nan's chest. She subconsciously apologized and retracted her arm. However, she bumped into something along the way and her arm was locked down by a solid object, rendering her unable to move. It was also at this moment that Yin Lo realized that there was a slight refraction in the surrounding air with a vague silhouette appearing around her arm. Exoskeleton. This is invisibility. No, it's a void layer. Yin Lo immediately thought of the crystal ball in her bag and the devil ray swimming in it. More or less. The demonstrative clamp was released, and the exoskeleton frame was embedded back into the sandwich domain. Luo Nan nodded slightly. "This is my strong suit, and it's the best state I can reach right now." Unfortunately, the second effect wasn't realized, the connection with the invisible yarn. This means that there are still flaws in the design of the spirit core. Yin Lo didn't really understand this part, but she finally had a vague idea. She didn't delve into the details and continued to ask, "Then the third effect is, the game character logs into the internet." "Oh, it's long-distance mapping. We still have to try it out." Yin Li's cognitive network almost broke again. She was stunned for 2 seconds before continuing. "Long distance? How far is it?" Before Luo Nan could reply, the latest news came from the intelligence channel. Yin Lo originally didn't want to pay attention to it, but the priority of the information was higher, and it involved the kind of people that needed special attention. The relevant information was directly projected onto the retina. A local bright light phenomenon appeared over the Pacific Ocean. There were signs of extraordinary activity. The intercontinental airships passing through this area were rumored to have been hijacked. The area of the incident was 1,500 kilometers away from Osaka City, and it was highly suspected that the Amaterasu Order was deeply involved. And at this time, Luo Nan clearly responded, it should be at least 1,400–500 kilometers. Yin Li's body trembled. At the same time, she could feel Snake Tongue suddenly raise her head from the side. Her gaze focused on Luo Nan's face. Luo Nan saw that Yin Li didn't have any new questions, so he turned his attention back to the work in front of him. He frowned slightly. I've delayed things a bit. It's impossible to be perfect, Mr. My lord. Yin Lo and Snake Tongue spoke at the same time. They instantly exchanged glances, but this time neither of them had any intention of declining modestly. That airship, the Deep Blue operation team at the warehouse, has been affected by the airship incident, and their operations have come to a halt. However, that Captain Jimmy has a few unfavorable associations with us. The importance of the information on both sides, including the depth involved, was different from the very beginning. Yin Lo unconsciously stopped talking and gave way to Snake Tongue. Luo Nan's gaze also pointed over there. Oh. Speaking of which, be it Snake Tongue or Yin Lo, they weren't too sure about Luo Nan's degree of involvement in the airship incident. But right now, just by looking at his reaction to the word airship, there was no longer any doubt. Snake Tongue's expression could still be considered calm, but the speed of her heartbeat had unwittingly increased by a level compared to a few seconds ago. Right now, she finally understood the severity of the situation behind Luo Nan's series of actions. Therefore, she used the most concise and accurate words to summarize Captain Jimmy's nonsense once. Then she expressed her own opinion. With Captain Jimmy's restless mood, it's very likely that he will make a rash move. If Master's current focus of attention is placed far away, we need to prepare a response plan as much as possible in advance. We can't let it become a negative interference. Snake Tongue had already spoken quite bluntly. At the very least, Yin Lo understood tacitly. If Luo Nan really wanted to compete with the major powers of the Amaterasu Order 1,500 kilometers away, then let's not talk about how he was going to accomplish this. As the rear, absolutely no problems could happen to Ban City. Even in normal times, this would be a very troublesome matter, let alone now. Snake Tongue and Yin Lo both looked at Luo Nan's reaction. Indeed, Luo Nan furrowed his brows. Don't tell me we have to have two characters? This is a bit difficult. Let's deal with the airship first. Could they deal with the other side as well? Even Snake Tongue's level of understanding wasn't enough. On the other hand, Yin Lo finally had the leeway to use her brain when it came to mundane matters. She quickly said, I'll immediately contact D City's side and the boss's side. I'll tell them about Mr. Mo's identity. It'll be good if we can interfere with them a bit. As for Mr. Mo. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. Can we first leave the yacht? Temporarily avoid contact with them, just like 10 days ago. Yin Lo made the connection to Luo Nan's mysterious and possibly world-shaking operation last time. It also began with leaving the yacht. We really do need to leave. What Yin Lo said was already within Luo Nan's plans. Since she mentioned it, he didn't say anything more. He simply waved his hand. You guys keep an eye on this side. I'll go greet True God and the Pope. If things go smoothly, it shouldn't take too long. Yes. Ha. Yin Lo suddenly froze on the spot, and Snake Tongue wasn't any better. Luo Nan was truly straightforward and efficient. He simply turned around and headed outside after speaking. The warehouse's exit wasn't in front of him, but the sealed cabin wall of the yacht. The scene of the yacht's cabin wall being torn apart 10 days ago instantly flashed in Yin Li's mind. She subconsciously opened her mouth, but before she could speak, she saw Luo Nan's figure pass through the rack of materials in front of the cabin wall like a phantom. He also passed through the thick cabin wall itself. There were no changes to the scene before him. The only thing missing was the living person. Chapter 849. Luo Nan walked at the bottom of Beishan Lake. To put it more accurately, he rode a self-made bubble to shuttle through the structure of space and time at the bottom of Beishan Lake. What he felt at this time and place was not the pressure of millions and millions of tons of water. Instead, it was the vast and boundless acceptance and rejection of the local structure of space and time that was hard to describe. Luo Nan slightly altered the old-fashioned analogy that Snake Tongue used. He was a temporary creation, a mutated gear set. He wanted to change his original role. He wanted to obtain more authority and occupy a more important position in the great machine and the great production line created by all living things in the world. He undoubtedly had to compete with other gear sets with similar structures, but they were even tighter and sturdier. This was an enormous challenge, and it was extremely intuitive. As Luo Nan walked between the structure of space and time, the pressure was everywhere. It penetrated the outer layer of the space-time bubble and acted upon the embryonic exoskeleton frame. During this time, a portion of the pressure was dispelled by his sandwich domain. Even so, he was still able to clearly hear the vibrating hum of the mutant skeletal material, which had gone through many layers of processing and forging. Occasionally, the sound would be hoarse or sharp. This was a sign of damage to the material structure. This pressure far exceeded the intensity of the water pressure at the bottom of the lake. But the bubble he designed was able to withstand the initial test. It traveled in a straight line through the complex environment at the bottom of Beishan Lake. Whether it was the undercurrent surging in the water layer or the crooked and scattered ruins of the city, they were unable to create any substantial obstruction. There were also the sensitive creatures at the bottom of the lake, including the mutants. They had completely overlooked such a blank target. This was because Luo Nan was walking in another dimension. In a certain sense, he was a part of this world. He was a redundancy that was hard to discover within the established structure of space and time. This was a relatively conservative standby state. Only in this way could the exoskeleton frame, which was not that perfect in its workmanship, be able to endure for a period of time. Luo Nan earnestly sensed the feeling of being in the great gear set and the great production line of the world. Right now, he did not possess the mysterious feeling of becoming one with heaven and earth. He only had a simple feeling of tightness, smoothness, and difficulty when the gears meshed with each other. He used these as a basic comparison to make the corresponding corrections. Gradually, this feeling became more abundant, becoming more exquisite and complicated. Sometimes, his reaction couldn't keep up, and it was hard for him to make adjustments in time. With the support of the Soul Cloak, which covered the entire world and had the condensation ring as its foundation, there was no environment more suitable for exerting power than an environment rich in water molecules. What Luo Nan needed to do was to borrow the Soul Cloak to project the basic configuration design of his main body over. Of course, his consciousness came along with it. Luo Nan's consciousness really seemed to have grown from the bottom of the sea 1,500 kilometers away. He was very familiar with this. He often used similar methods over the past few months to project the core of his own concept into the South Pacific Ocean. He borrowed the abundant water vapor conditions there to play hide-and-seek with the powerful extraordinaries from all over the world. He misled them, embedding the concepts of Enlightenment Palace and a new plane within. Luo Nan even gave this method a name. It was called Luo's Core. From his perspective, Luo's core and lamination interference technology should be equivalent in terms of core. They were both rooted in the configuration system. But the former spent most of their time hiding behind natural phenomena, confusing the public and seeing, forever hiding in the shadows of people's perception. But Luo Nan relied on the lamination interference technology to become the focal point of everything. He controlled the information that was leaked to the outside, turning the fake into the real. He withstood the multidimensional test of extraordinaries. This required the pinnacle of detail. In extreme situations, the nitpicking of details was never a test of one's attitude. It was a test of technique. The conditions of seawater and lake water were different. There was an essential difference between what was real and what was fake. What was fake was fake. Some laboratory designs would naturally reveal their flaws after the environment changed. The cause might just be the change in air pressure, temperature difference, or even salinity. Luo Nan would never have thought of these details when he was constructing his theory. Even now, he couldn't consider putting all the conditions in. Otherwise, the configuration design would be cumbersome. His head might explode before he could even face a true god. Luo Nan could only rely on the principles of the lamination interference technology and his own attainments in spacetime configuration to add and subtract. He let the negative feedback of the outside world grind away the mistakes and redundant things. He was currently the redundancy between heaven and earth. But in order to achieve this high-level redundancy, he needed to abandon the low-level design. He needed to grasp the elements that were more in line with the essence. He needed an existence that was infinitely close to reality to be placed there. He needed to obtain the natural feedback of heaven and earth. This was a process of constant grinding and adjustment. It was to the point where Luo Nan ignored the passage of time in the outside world. He ignored the concrete changes until the sunlight pierced through the seawater and illuminated the gloomy world. Ah, I've been discovered. Was it that kind of discovery? Chapter 850. The interference power that came from within the light carried a familiar flavor. This was the unique quality of a true god. It wasn't an absolute thing to say. Even though they were of the same system, the feeling the Pope gave off was more or less the same. In any case, it was the kind of bright, dazzling, fully burning scorching feeling. This power combined with the rules and laws of the great divine treasure of the propping mulberry tree. It was like a propulsion furnace that supplied energy to the propping mulberry tree. It was also like the entire propping mulberry tree was its fuel. However, there was still a slight difference from the brief confrontation that occurred a few days ago in the wilderness laboratory. Back then, the true God, under the urging of negative emotions, did not hold back at all. The true God tore through the barrier of the void and smashed over. But now, the true God was in a semi-detached state, performing a routine scan. He had accidentally caught the true God pausing for an instant before the true God exerted its power a second time. This tiny disconnect was far too obvious and slow on Luo Nan's current level. He even had the time to adjust his set of configuration details in response to the sudden change in environment. Only then did he stir, allowing the projected spacetime bubble, no, it should be said that the game character he had just created, to log in and go online. No matter how tedious, tense, and precise the preparatory work he had done before logging in, no matter how much energy he had consumed, Luo Nan's mood was strangely calm when he truly arrived at the moment of verification. Against the light that illuminated the surrounding seabed, Luo Nan came into contact with the true God's pressure that penetrated through space. He had a rough idea of what was going on. A slight distortion occurred in the structure of the seawater 100 meters deep. A high-frequency vibration existed on the mental plane, destroying the existing environment. It also forced the surrounding living beings to break away from their original rhythm and expose themselves. The true God's methods could not be said to be wrong. In fact, they were quite brilliant. The underwater life forms in the surrounding area were like a sieve. They were screened out as long as they had the slightest bit of suspicion. Immediately after, a scorching mental attack, like an electric net, came down with a buzz. In 3 to 5 seconds, the lives of over a dozen species, whether they were mutants or ordinary sea creatures, were forcefully stripped away. But at this time, the new character, who had just logged in, followed the tiny arc of the distorted spacetime structure. It smoothly shuttled back and forth. It was as if the character was sliding on a guideway. Even though there was still a slight dissonance when the gears were engaged and switched, it added a proper texture. On this trajectory, the mental attacks that could have been fatal were like brilliant fireworks. They seemed to explode at a low altitude, like stars falling like rain, but in reality, they did not hit the ground at all. An error in judgment. Of course, this was a mistake on the part of the true god. His attack had completely missed. From Luo Nan's perspective, this was an excellent piece of evidence. The configuration design idea has passed the test. The conduction and transformation of the soul cloak are also going smoothly. It's basically operating without any problems, but the feedback from the outside world needs to be corrected. What about the degree of realism? The controller at the bottom of North Mountain Lake was still thinking in an orderly manner. But at the same time, the experiencer, who shared the same lineage at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, received a clear, powerful, and admiring mental message from a true god. You're here. Good job. It was indeed excellent. Luo Nan gave himself a thumbs up without the slightest hesitation. Looking at it from a certain angle, the true god was exposing his own ignorance, and Luo Nan absolutely wouldn't be so kind as to warn him. Luo Nan didn't receive a response, but the true god's transmitted mental message clearly contained impatience. There wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation within it. The soul cloak that completely covered Luo Nan transmitted back feedback. Within the clouds of the stratosphere, the true god's transmitted power made another round of movement. The center of gravity changed, and it locked onto the surface of the distant Pacific Ocean. Soon, an even more direct response appeared from the depths of the sea. The roots of the Fusang divine tree were rapidly digging in, interweaving into an incorporeal network. The blazing power churned, interfering with each other on the mental and material planes, forming burst after burst of intense light. It was like a photographer's capture operation. The range was correct, but the situation of losing focus was more serious. At least, Luo Nan hadn't truly been locked onto yet. Luo Nan had even abandoned many things during this period of time. Perhaps the addition of these things would have been more perfect in theory, but in actual combat, in a rapidly changing environment, these were merely meaningless details. The true god wouldn't pay attention to them, and Luo Nan didn't need to waste them. The situation was developing in the direction that Luo Nan hoped for. It was absolutely impossible to create a Luo Nan riding a devil ray and directly greet a true god. But he had to make those two believe, at least partially, that Luo Nan was right here without truly seeing Luo Nan face to face. So far, Luo Nan had succeeded. Luo Nan maintained his silence. He controlled the space-time bubble to shuttle back and forth within the tight structure of space and time. Chapter 851. The region of the soul cloak was fragmented, rising and falling amidst the fine waves of the sea breeze. Luo Nan was within the cogwheel set of the space-time structure. He moved and did not move. What did not move was his role. In the strict structure of time and space, the change opened up an undeserved gap, becoming a redundancy that was originally non-existent. It continued to operate without being directly rejected. What moved was his relative position. From the bottom of the sea to the sky, from the deep water to the clouds, he drove millions upon millions of water molecules to gather and disperse, provoking the senses of a true god. He was like the water spirit of legend. He leaped and shuttled through the water vapor, coming and going unfathomably. This feeling was a bit similar to an out-of-body experience. Ever since Luo Nan's soul cloak covered the entire world, he experienced less and less of this drifting feeling of a kite with its string cut. Luo Nan did not forget for a moment that his soul strength and fleshly body were still in a serious state of imbalance. Though he had the soul cloak's vast coverage to help disperse the imbalance, and he had the complex structure of the sandwich domain to provide a buffer, an imbalance was an imbalance. He had to pay attention to the coupling state of his body and soul frame at all times. He had to maintain a difficult balance between his God gear, which had entered an uncontrollable state of explosive expansion, and his body gear, which was limited by its physical nature. Sometimes, thoughts like this would jump out in Luo Nan's mind: I might as well throw away my fleshly body. It's so weak, clumsy, and it always drags me down. Especially when fighting against a powerful enemy. I have to split half of my mental energy to ponder over how to hide this fatal weakness. Of course, the leaping and flickering thoughts of humans were the most unreliable. From a rational point of view, abandoning one's fleshly body was the same as destroying one's foundation in the material world. The mode of existence of life, established over billions of years of evolutionary history, would transform into a phantom of nothingness. Perhaps there would be a certain amount of inertia in a short period of time, making it easier to operate. But in the long run, it was impossible to support the endless cultivation of the future. Whether it was the lessons of blood that had emerged endlessly in the short few decades of Earth, or the rigorous theories of the mysterious civilization displayed by the virtual brain system, all of them emphasized and verified this point from multiple perspectives. Luo Nan was a rational person under most circumstances. It was impossible for the occasional crazy thought to shake the wall of his rationality. He could not let his heart be blinded by lard and step onto a dead end. The true God was absolutely not the kind of idiot who wouldn't turn back until he ran into a wall. Don't look at how he had chased Luo Nan for a long time without success. He had other methods of dealing with this process. The projection of the Fusang divine tree shot through the air within this land of death. Its incorporeal roots extended outwards, greedily devouring the flesh, blood, and life force of the surrounding living beings. It borrowed the nourishment of the boiling emotions between life and death to gradually turn from a projection of nothingness into reality. At the very least, the power descending from the abyssal region grew more and more real and terrifying. At the same time, it formed an even more powerful compression effect on the surrounding void. The true God seemed to have sensed something. Having lost a reliable fulcrum of believers, it was very difficult for the true God to display a direct method like he did a few days ago in the wilderness. But the method of boiling a frog in warm water possessed a certain degree of feasibility. It manifested the true God's clear train of thought that was the complete opposite of his violent actions. The undulating undulations of his soul cloak were weakening in regularity. This was the result of the water molecules pervading the atmosphere suffering substantial damage. This was also the result of the warping and deformation of the structure of space and time. It was as if Luo Nan was playing a game of parkour. He had to find a relatively safe route in this vile environment. He had to avoid the projected spacetime bubble from colliding head-on with the true God's Fusang divine tree system. Fortunately, this game had a time limit and a finish line. The true God's methods had already partially exceeded the scope of the Fusang divine tree system. It was the type of overclocking. Don't look at the oppressive warm water on the plane of reality. Compared to the abyssal region, it was already a volcanic eruption-like impact and turbulence. This was a good thing. Even with the true God's abilities, it was impossible to maintain this impact force for a long period of time over 1,000 kilometers. Therefore, Luo Nan knew what he had to do. His consciousness anchored the destination within the intermittent soul cloak and the warping void gap. It was the intercontinental airship that was gradually slowing down. It was already beginning to deviate from its course. It was also the location of the trap set up by the true God and the Pope. Luo Nan could more or less guess the situation over there. But no matter what, it was better for everyone to meet face to face. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.